The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against my patrol car windows like it was trying to get in. I shouldn't have taken the call. A missing person report in this county usually meant a few hours of paperwork. Maybe a neighbor calling a stray teenager, but something about the number nagged at me. The house sat on a winding street I didn't recognize, far enough from the main road to feel like it belonged to a different world entirely. The GPS had insisted I'd arrived, but all I could see was darkness and the wet gleam of the road. The lawn was perfect, too perfect. The grass cut in straight lines, the flower beds untouched by weeds, like someone had frozen time for this property. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Nothing else moved. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The smell of rain mixing with something else, an underlying scent I couldn't place. Old wood, maybe, or dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. My partner, Johnson, was already at the door, flashlight cutting through the shadows. He waved me over, but I hesitated, studying the windows. Something about the way the blinds were drawn. It was as if they were watching us. I shook my head. It didn't make sense. Houses didn't watch. The door wasn't locked. Not bolted, not chained, just slightly ajar. I felt a flicker of doubt, but I pushed it aside. Calls like this demanded action, and hesitation had consequences. Inside, the house was exactly what you'd expect. Clean, orderly, a normal family home. Plates on the counter, an almost too bright kitchen, shoes by the door. Nothing was missing, nothing looked broken, and yet the air felt heavy. The kind of heaviness that settles without wind, without storm. I stepped further in, flashlight sweeping the hallway. The hardwood floor creaked once. Johnson followed, hand on his weapon, eyes scanning. I could feel his unease, and for once, I didn't try to shake it. I shared it. Every room was the same. Living room, perfectly arranged. Bedrooms untouched, nothing out of place. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting, watching us arrive. The sense of a presence, just beyond vision, pressing in. The first open loop hit me when I noticed the living room window. The blinds were slightly open, just enough to suggest someone had peeked through them recently. But no footprints led away from the house. Nothing. How had someone left? Or had they been here at all? We moved methodically, checking closets, cabinets, even the small attic space accessible by a ladder. Every space was empty, silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rain against the roof. And then I noticed it. The chair in the corner of the kitchen. It was facing the wall. Not unusual. Except it hadn't been placed there neatly. It was slightly tipped, like someone had spun it around and then abandoned it. The shadow it cast on the wall made it seem like it had an arm. For a moment, my mind twisted it into a figure. I shook my head. Too tired. Too much caffeine. Too much rain. I called out for the resident. No answer. My radio squawked with static. I glanced at Johnson. He hadn't called anyone. He just kept his gaze on the back hallway, where the kitchen led to bedrooms. I followed his stare and my stomach dropped. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been. Not physically, but perceptually. My eyes kept measuring it against the floor plan of my mind, and it didn't match. That should have been impossible. Houses didn't stretch when no one was looking. I told myself that. I repeated it. Yet the feeling that we'd stepped into something larger than the space around us refused to dissipate. There were small signs, subtle but unsettling. A set of keys left on a dresser, untouched, but the keys weren't mine or Johnson's. A mug on the counter, still warm. Or had it been that warm hours ago? My skin prickled. Every normal thing seemed wrong. And the open loops multiplied. Where was the resident? Why did the house feel alive? Or worse, aware? I remember the sound before I saw it. A creak upstairs. Not a floorboard under our weight. Not a settling beam. Something deliberate. We froze. Johnson motioned for me to follow him. Slowly, we moved up the staircase, each step echoing in the cavernous silence. The upper hallway stretched endlessly, though the house shouldn't have had that many rooms. Each door we passed was closed, yet I felt eyes behind them. The resident wasn't there, but the watchers were. I couldn't see them, couldn't prove it, but I could feel the weight of observation pressing in. My pulse raced, tight in my chest, mind latching onto every imagined sound. A door creaked softly in the distance, or had it? My ears weren't playing tricks, were they? We reached the master bedroom. It was immaculate, the bed made perfectly, sheets tucked in. Nothing moved, yet something had been there recently. The scent, faint perfume or cologne, lingered unplaceable. I could almost see the outline of a figure seated, watching us from the corner, but when I turned, nothing. I looked again, and the corner was empty. The open loop tugged harder. Were we being observed from some space beyond vision? Were the eyes and the walls, the shadows themselves? I didn't answer. Johnson didn't answer. We simply stood there, the hum of the lights and the rain pressing in around us. I checked the bedrooms adjoining the master. Empty. Each door I opened revealed the same, untouched normality, toys on the floor, yet each arranged as if waiting for someone to come home. The dining room chairs lined up perfectly, the windows closed, and still that sensation of expectation, that someone or something had been here and left but hadn't left. I called dispatch. No one answered. Static. Nothing. The house swallowed the signal. The sound, the world beyond its walls. Another open loop. Where had the line of communication gone? In the kitchen, I found a note. Simple, childlike handwriting. Just one word. Stay. No signature. No explanation. I pocketed it, feeling the weight of its intent. Was it for us? For the missing resident? Or had we only imagined it? The micro-reward, some tangible evidence, something real amidst the surreal. And yet it offered no comfort, only more questions. We began our search again, more thorough this time. Each closet door opened, each drawer emptied, revealed only the perfection of absence. No signs of struggle, no signs of habitation outside the ordinary, and the open loops multiplied. Did the missing resident ever exist? Had they stepped into some other layer of reality, leaving behind only the trappings of normal life? I couldn't say, but the dread was real, clawing under my skin, pressing into my chest with every heartbeat. I paused by the living room window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but outside, the world looked distorted. The reflection of the room on the glass seemed off. Johnson caught my elbow. His eyes wide, betrayed his own creeping unease. The reflection showed us, yes, but also shadows moving where no shadows should be. Peripheral movements. Shapes that didn't belong to the furniture. Watching. Waiting. Another escalation. Another hint that we were inside something unknowable, something patient. By the time we decided to leave, I realized something had changed. The house itself seemed aware of our decision. The door felt heavier, the air thicker. Exiting wasn't relief, it was an acknowledgement. The weight of unseen eyes lingered as we stepped onto the wet driveway. I glanced back, windows dark, but the sense of being observed remained. We drove away slowly, rain sluicing down the windshield. Yet even in the car, I couldn't shake the sensation that the house had followed us with invisible gaze. That was the final loop left open. The watchers existed beyond sight. Were they still there? Would they ever let go? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The dread clung to me long after the lights of the house disappeared behind the trees. By the time we returned to the station, silence had returned to the street. Ordinary, but the feeling of rawness didn't leave. That house, its perfection, its emptiness, the note, the shadows, all of it pressed into my memory. It wasn't a place to fear for a night. It was a place that haunted without presence, without sound. The missing resident, if they had ever been real, was gone, and we were left with the cold truth. Some absences are not meant to be solved, only endured. Even now, I can't drive past that county without looking for that road, that house, the lawn that shouldn't exist. And I always feel it first, the stillness, the weight of invisible eyes, watching, waiting, patient, silent, and the last open loop of the night remains. Were we ever meant to leave? I turned onto the side street, tires crunching on gravel that hadn't been moved in days, maybe weeks. The streetlights flickered above, one after the other, throwing long, jagged shadows across the pavement. I thought I'd heard something. Footsteps, maybe, but the road was empty. Not a single car, not a single living soul. The houses were lined up like soldiers at attention, neat and perfect, but lifeless. Lawns trimmed to precision, mailboxes straight, doors locked tight. Yet everything felt staged, like a set for a movie where the actors had just stepped off, leaving only props behind. I glanced at Johnson. His grip on the flashlight was tense, knuckles white. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Our radios were dead again. Static had swallowed our calls to dispatch hours ago, leaving only the low hum of the rain and the occasional hiss of distant tires on wet asphalt. I felt the weight of the street pressing down, the quiet so deep it throbbed. Something was wrong. Not missing wrong, but intentional. The kind of wrong that gets under your skin before your brain can name it. We moved down the street slowly. Every door we passed had its own story. Curtains drawn just so, bikes tipped over in the yard, garden tools neatly stacked, signs of life that looked rehearsed, too precise. Each window seemed to hold a shadow for a second before vanishing when I blinked. I tried to rationalize it, told myself it was my imagination. Johnson didn't argue. He just kept his eyes forward, but I could see the flicker of fear in them whenever the street shifted in periphery. A dog barked, or something barked, from the end of the street. It was faint, distant, and immediately cut off as if someone had pulled the sound from the air. I froze, listening. Nothing, just a wet whisper of rain against asphalt. Another open loop formed in my mind. Was someone out there watching us? Or had something been here and left without leaving? I felt it then, the first undeniable brush of unease crawling up my spine. The neighborhood wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for something we didn't understand. A house on the corner caught my attention. Lights on inside, but no movement. The blinds moved slightly, just enough to reveal a shape that vanished when I squinted. My chest tightened. I shook my head. It was probably a reflection. The storm outside playing tricks. Yet I couldn't ignore it. Something about the way the light hit the walls, the way shadows pooled in corners, felt intentional, not random, calculated. Another open loop. Why was it watching? Was it watching? We approached the house, boots squelching on wet grass. The door was unlocked. That alone would have been normal in another call. But here, it felt like a trap, an invitation. I raised my flashlight, sweeping across the interior. The living room was set for a family dinner. Plates on the table, glasses filled halfway, as if someone had been interrupted mid-meal. And yet, not a sound. No smell of food, no warmth. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, clean, sterile, artificial. Micro reward, tangible evidence of life. But the reward didn't comfort me. It unsettled me further. Johnson whispered, "This is too perfect." I nodded. Perfect, yes, but wrong in every detail. Chairs positioned just so, pillows fluffed to an exact degree, toys arranged in a pattern that looked deliberate, not accidental. Whoever had been here had staged everything. Was it for us? Or had it been waiting, arranging itself in our presence? I didn't answer. My gut told me some things weren't meant to be answered, just endured. Upstairs, the bedrooms repeated the same pattern. Beds made with surgical precision, clothes folded in exact rectangles. A small desk in a corner of one room had a notebook open, pages blank except for a single line on the top. Look closer. My hand shook as I picked it up. The writing was childish, almost innocent, yet the weight behind it wasn't. Another loop opened. Look closer. At what? At whom? And why? The question lingered, heavy, pressing against my mind as the rain tapped insistently against the roof. We split up, methodically checking each room. Each door opened to reveal the same careful staging, the same quiet absence. Outside, the street remained silent. Windows of neighboring houses showed nothing. Yet I felt a presence behind every pane. Johnson called out softly from the hallway, voice almost swallowed by the oppressive stillness. "Did you see that?" I shook my head, trying to calm the rising tension in my chest. What could I have seen? A reflection? A shadow? Or something waiting just out of reach? Another micro reward. The feeling that we weren't alone, even if the evidence was impossible to pin down. Descending the stairs, I noticed the kitchen. A kettle was on the stove, steam rising slowly. curling into the air like smoke from a candle. It wasn't plugged in. How had it heated? My stomach dropped. The neighborhood wasn't just staged. It was alive. In some way I couldn't understand. It reacted to our presence. Every shadow, every slight sound, every flicker of light. It was a system, an organism, and we were part of it now. Another open loop. Were we being led or watched or both? Outside, the rain had slowed, leaving the pavement wet and shiny. The street stretched endlessly in both directions, though I knew it shouldn't. Distances felt wrong, proportions off. Houses that had been a block away seemed farther, then closer, then shifted entirely when I blinked. I looked at Johnson. He didn't notice or refuse to acknowledge it. But I could see it in the tension of his shoulders. The world had become unstable, manipulated by some unseen hand. Another escalation. Another thread of dread pulling tight. At the end of the street, I saw it. A figure in a window, just standing there, motionless, not moving toward us, not retreating, just watching. A child? An adult? Impossible to tell. The window was dark except for the faint reflection of the interior lights. I raised my flashlight, hand trembling. The figure vanished. I blinked. It was gone. Did it move? Or had it never been there? My pulse quickened. Another open loop. The watchers were everywhere, but nowhere. We left the street slowly, scanning behind us at every turn. Nothing followed, nothing chased. And yet the quiet pressed against us, a suffocating weight. The houses seemed to sigh as we drove away, a subtle vibration through the tires, a whispering that wasn't on the radio. The neighborhood remained perfect, empty, and wrong, a staged diorama hiding something we couldn't see. The micro-reward lingered, a single glimpse, a single taste of the unnatural, enough to know we weren't imagining it, not entirely, enough to leave us with a dread that wouldn't fade. Back in the patrol car, I stared out the windshield. The street behind us seemed normal again. Rain-slicked asphalt, puddles reflecting the streetlights. But the memory remained. The silence, the staged lives, the fleeting shapes in windows. It pressed into my chest, a constant reminder that the world could bend in ways we didn't understand. And the final open loop stayed with me, gnawing. How many more streets like this existed, just beyond the counter lines? Waiting for the right eyes to arrive, waiting for someone to notice the unnatural perfection, waiting for someone to disappear, like the missing resident we hadn't yet found. We drove on, headlights cutting through mist, tires rolling over wet pavement, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being inside a living shadow, a world arranged around us for reasons we couldn't understand. And somewhere in the quiet, the watchers waited, patient, invisible, knowing, and I knew we'd never really leave. The first house we passed had its blinds half drawn, letting just enough light escape to trace the shape of someone or something. Inside, I caught it from the corner of my eye, a figure standing still, perfectly still, staring. My chest tightened. I swore it moved when I blinked, but when I focused fully, it was gone. Johnson muttered something under his breath, and I knew he'd seen it too. That wasn't imagination. Not yet. The street stretched on, wet and shiny from the rain, each house an identical shadowed box. Yet each held its own secret, its own watcher. A curtain shifted subtly in one window, a flicker of movement in another. My flashlight swept across the siding and windows, but it was useless. The figures weren't there for the light. They existed outside logic, outside our expectations. I realized our radios had been dead for nearly an hour. No way to call this in, no way to anchor ourselves to the world outside this street. We approached a corner house with peeling paint. The front steps slick with rain. A shadow moved inside, thin and tall, not quite human. I froze, hand on the doorframe. Johnson whispered, "Do you see that?" I nodded, voice catching in my throat. The figure didn't shift. It didn't blink. It just waited. The more I stared, the heavier the air became, as if the room itself was inhaling around us. Micro-reward, confirmation that we weren't alone. But the dread pressed harder with the knowledge. Inside, the house felt empty but lived in. Chairs upturned. A plate of food cold on the table. Glasses half full. The floorboards creaked beneath our boots. Yet there was no wind, no draft. The watcher had been here, and perhaps still was, watching through some impossible vantage. A small mirror on the wall reflected nothing but our own faces. I caught movement in the corner of my reflection, a flicker of someone standing behind us in frame. I spun. Nothing. Another open loop formed in my mind. Was it watching us through reflections, or had it been a trick of light? The hallways stretched forward, each door a question. One bedroom held a figure at the window, thin and still. It disappeared when I blinked, but I swore I heard a soft exhale, like breath leaving lungs unseen. Another figure appeared in the upstairs landing, pale against the dim hallway light, watching silently. I tried rationalizing. Reflections, rain-tricking shadows, fog outside, but my gut screamed otherwise. The world around us was bending, flickering in ways it shouldn't. Each watcher's presence escalated my unease, twisting reality with subtle insistence. I moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping, eyes scanning, mind racing. In one room, a child's drawing lay on the floor, scattered crayons around it. Figures were scribbled on the paper, all staring from windows. Tiny eyes staring, unblinking. Micro reward, a clue, tangible evidence that someone or something was mimicking life, shaping it for us. But the reward wasn't comfort. It made the unnatural real. The watchers weren't just observing. They were constructing this world, orchestrating it down to every detail. Johnson stayed close, whispering warnings. "We shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, but we couldn't leave. Each figure outside every window pulled our gaze, demanded our attention, reshaped our focus. I noticed how our sense of distance faltered. Houses that were a few steps apart seemed farther, then closer, then warp entirely when I blinked. Perspective twisted. We weren't just observers. We were part of the architecture now, trapped in a street that bent perception. The kitchen held another small shock. A kettle on the stove, water still boiling despite no power. The sound of it rising and hissing filled the room. My pulse quickened. Another open loop. Was it the watchers doing, or our minds faltering under tension? A soft scratching came from the back door. Not nails, not claws, like someone tracing wood lightly with their fingertips. Johnson and I froze, eyes meeting, unspoken terror filling the air. I stepped forward, hand trembling on the doorknob. Another micro reward. Sound, evidence of presence, but the origin remained unknown. Outside, rain had softened, leaving a mirror-like sheen across the street. Figures appeared and disappeared in windows, fleeting glimpses. One stood at the corner, impossibly still, watching us move. I realized the watchers weren't all human. Or if they were, they weren't constrained by human logic. Each sighting warped my sense of reality, made each step forward a risk. The line between imagination and observation blurred. Open loop. Were we seeing what was there, or being shown what it wanted us to see? We tried to call dispatch again. Silence. Static. No connection. Every attempt emphasized our isolation, cementing the street's control. The watchers didn't need to move. They didn't need to speak. Presence alone was weapon enough. Micro reward, subtle validation. We were in a controlled space, yet the controller remained unseen. I caught a movement in the rear view mirror, glimpses through windows lining the street behind us. Johnson saw it too. Figures reflecting our retreat, moving in tandem, not quite human, just aligned. My chest tightened. They weren't chasing. They didn't need to. Presence alone was sufficient. Open loop. What did they want? Observation? Experimentation? Or something darker we hadn't yet recognized? We left the street finally, tires rolling over wet asphalt, headlights cutting through mist, but the watchers remained. In every reflection, every window, their gaze lingered. I knew we were changed, altered by the experience. The quiet terror of being observed seeped into my chest. Even now, hours later, I can feel their eyes on me through windows, reflections, every darkened surface. The open loop remains. Who, or what, decides when to vanish, when to appear? The memory pressed, vivid, inescapable. I saw shapes I couldn't identify, forms that shouldn't exist, eyes that never blinked. Each one a reminder that the neighborhood wasn't empty, and the watchers were patient. They weren't human, not entirely, and one certainty persisted. Whatever they were, we had walked into their world, and they knew it. Even in the calm of returning to the patrol car, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every darkened window I passed afterward carried weight. The watchers weren't gone. They were everywhere, watching, waiting, and in the silence that follows, I know we've only begun to understand the rules of this place. Another open loop, unclosed. When will the watchers decide we're part of the game? We drove on, silence heavy, reflections of streetlights and puddles flickering like eyes. My mind replayed every glimpse, every shadow. I thought I glimpsed movement from inside the car mirror, figures aligned with ours, mimicking every turn. I looked again. Nothing, or maybe everything. Micro reward, awareness. But it didn't bring relief. It cemented the dread. The watchers weren't gone. They simply waited, patient and invisible, as the world around us began to feel less certain, more like a stage where we were the audience trapped, and they, the unseen directors, knew the ending. I felt it before I saw it. The empty weight in the air as we pulled away from the last house. The streetlights flickered in uneven rhythm, and I realized I'd stopped noticing the rain. It wasn't raining anymore, at least not outside the car, but every window bore the faint sheen of droplets, and every reflection seemed to twitch with motion. Johnson stayed quiet, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The houses behind us looked hollow, abandoned, yet I could swear eyes followed us from every darkened pane. We tried to rationalize it as we drove on. Maybe shadows, maybe a trick of wet glass and tired minds. But rational thought felt brittle, easily snapping under the weight of what we'd seen. That first corner house, the one with the peeling paint, had imprinted itself on my mind. The figure, or figures, we glimpsed their refused to vanish from memory. I kept turning my head, expecting them to appear in the rear view mirror, expecting them to be closer than physics allowed. But every check revealed nothing, or something different. Open loop, had they moved, or had our perception twisted around them? The neighborhood was silent beyond comprehension. No hum of air conditioners, no distant barking, not even the subtle creak of board settling, only the occasional drip of water from gutters, sounding sharp and deliberate in the quiet. Every shadow looked deliberate now, every corner a potential doorway for the unseen. I realized I was holding my breath, unconsciously anticipating something that might not exist. Johnson muttered, "Feels like they're everywhere." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him he was letting imagination take hold. But deep down I knew better. Micro reward, shared awareness. Yet dread doubled. We passed houses we checked hours earlier. Windows once empty now seemed occupied in the peripheral vision. A curtain twitched where no curtain existed. I caught movement at the edge of a window, tall, thin, staring. But when I focused fully, it vanished. The watchers weren't bound to what we could see. Open loop. If they could vanish at will, could they appear anywhere? My pulse spiked. Every reflection in the car glass a potential portal. The patrol car felt smaller with every block, heavier. Rain-slicked streets reflected headlights like distorted mirrors, stretching the world into impossible angles. I tried to anchor myself, reminding my mind that these were houses, that we were safe inside the car, that nothing could step through walls. But the sensation of being watched persisted, prickling my skin even when the street was empty. Every blink, every glance could bring a watcher into view. Johnson's breathing grew louder, faster, anxious, but his eyes were fixed on the road ahead, avoiding the side mirrors. At one point, a figure flickered in the rear-view mirror, not fully formed, just a vague outline of someone standing on the curb, staring. I blinked. Gone. I turned my head. Gone. The open loop widened. Were they tied to our perception, or moving independently, waiting for the perfect moment to remind us we weren't alone? We pulled off the main road onto a side street, hoping the more open spaces would lessen the unease. But here, the silence was even more oppressive. One house had a porch light on, though no electricity should have been running. A swing moved slowly back and forth in the yard, though the air was still. Micro reward, tangible movement. but my stomach churned. Something unseen was orchestrating it. I remembered the small bedroom with scattered crayons, the drawings of figures staring from windows. That image burned in my mind, replaying over and over. Did the Watchers create these? Or had someone else? The question didn't matter. What mattered was the implication. These entities weren't just observing. They were shaping our reality, sculpting fear into the environment itself. A sudden shift in perspective made my chest tighten. Reflections in the car mirrors didn't match the street outside. Another figure appeared, briefly, crouched in a corner window across the street, head tilted unnaturally. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of light, but the movement was too fluid, too intentional. Johnson glanced at me. Our eyes met, and I saw the same question in his gaze. Open loop. Were they testing us, or were we already caught in whatever game the street dictated? The farther we drove, the more distorted reality became. Distances seemed wrong, angles impossible. Houses seemed closer together, then farther apart, then warped entirely when seen through our peripheral vision. I realized the Watchers had control over perception, not the world outside, but our experience of it. Every blink, every glance risked bringing something into view we weren't ready to see. Micro reward, understanding, but it offered no comfort, only escalation. By the time we reached the county line, the street behind us was a blur of shadows. I couldn't tell which figures had been real, which imagined, which existed only to pressure our minds. The rain returned lightly, soft taps on the windshield, and for a fleeting moment, I thought the world might be normal again. Relief flickered, but then a movement caught the edge of my eye. A window in an abandoned house. The silhouette of a Watcher, standing still, head tilted as if studying us even now. We stopped briefly at a gas station to log the call. Johnson filled out forms mechanically, eyes darting toward every darkened window. I felt the same, an awareness that the Watchers extended beyond the street, beyond what we had seen. Perhaps they always existed beyond our sight, and our patrol had simply intersected their domain. Open loop. How far did their reach extend? Could they be anywhere, waiting patiently? Driving home, the city seemed normal, almost comforting. Streetlights lined up predictably. Windows held no figures, but the experience lingered, pressing into memory. Every darkened room in my own house felt charged, every reflection suspicious. Micro reward, perspective. We survived, but the unease wasn't gone. It had followed us, like a shadow clinging to the mind. I kept thinking about the neighborhood, the figures, and the distortions of reality. What had we truly witnessed? Open loop. Had we seen them as they really were, or only what they allowed us to perceive? The more I pondered, the more I realized we would never know. We could document, analyze, rationalize, but the Watchers existed beyond sight, beyond comprehension. And somewhere, somehow, they remain patient, waiting for the next intrusion. Even now, I catch glimpses in windows when passing unfamiliar houses. A shadow that shifts just as my focus settles. A reflection that lingers too long. The world feels subtly altered. I feel their eyes on me, not always seen, not always sensed, but present. The patrol car, the street, the empty houses, all part of memory stitched into my perception. A warning that being observed is not always about fear. Sometimes it is about understanding that the Watchers decide the rules, and we are subject to them, endlessly. I look back at the county line on maps, the streets we drove, and I know we left something behind. Not tangible, not recorded, but something intangible, a residual pressure, a lingering dread that refuses to dissipate. Open loop. Will they follow us, or will we return to witness them again? The question is unanswerable, but the awareness it sparks is enough. Enough to ensure we never forget, enough to make every quiet street a potential stage for their gaze. The fog hit before I even saw it, rolling over the asphalt in thick, trembling waves. One moment the road stretched ahead, clear and familiar. The next it was swallowed in white, everything beyond the headlights dissolving into nothing. I slowed instinctively, fingers tightening around the wheel. Johnson's voice cut through the car's hum. "You seeing this?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Visibility dropped so fast it felt like the world had been yanked out from under us. I reached for the radio to call dispatch. Static hissed back at me, a broken pulse of sound, then a single, distorted voice I didn't recognize. It was faint, almost pleading. "Keep away." The transmission cut. We tried again, but the same thing happened. Garbled words, bursts of static, and then silence that pressed against my ears. Open loop. Was it interference or something else listening to us? The car's headlights barely pierced more than a few feet ahead. The fog wasn't fog. It was alive in a way that made the air taste thicker, heavier. Micro reward. I noticed a faint outline of a road sign up ahead, flickering through the haze. Relief came in the form of that single anchor. But as we approached, the sign was different than memory suggested. Its lettering warped, almost handwritten by a trembling hand. My stomach clenched. I slowed further, heart ticking in sync with my windshield wipers. They did little but smear the fog into ghostly shapes. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision. But when I turned my head, there was nothing, or something that vanished at the blink of an eye. Johnson whispered, "I don't like this," though I knew he'd been quiet for the last 10 minutes, listening to the static and staring into white nothingness. Every mile felt longer, the fog wrapping around us, compressing the road. Trees loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching into the mist. I caught glimpses of shapes, figures standing at impossible angles. But when headlights swung across them, nothing was there. Pattern interrupt. Perception shifted, fear escalated. Were they real or trickery of light and exhaustion? Then came the sound, soft, low, almost beneath the hiss of our tires on wet asphalt. Footsteps, not ours. Behind the car, faint and scattered, matching our pace but never overtaking. I glanced at Johnson. He froze, eyes wide, listening. Open loop. Were they walking with us, or had we entered a space where time and movement didn't behave normally? I flicked the wipers again. Another figure appeared, crouched just off the roadside, a head too still, too symmetrical. My mind tried to rationalize. Deer, a stray animal, a trick of shadow. But the posture, the deliberate tilt of the head, it wasn't natural. Relief flickered and died instantly. Micro reward. Clarity and observation. Escalating fear immediately. The radio buzzed once more, sharper this time. Words tried to form. "Do not leave." The voice was closer, distorted, but almost familiar. I turned the volume up, but static swallowed it. Johnson tried to reply, but the words died in his throat, swallowed by the fog itself. It was as if the mist was alive, filtering our speech, reshaping our reality. Open loop. Did it exist to trap us, or just to watch? I took the turn toward the old county road, the one avoided in heavy fog. Here, the white thickened to a wall. Headlights barely illuminated the center line. Roadside ditches disappeared. We slowed almost to a crawl, tires whispering against wet asphalt. The car felt smaller, vulnerable. Trees leaned inward, as if arching over the road to block us from the world beyond. Every movement seemed amplified, each shadow exaggerated. A sudden shift. I glimpsed movement directly ahead. Another patrol car? No, it was darker than the fog itself. A shape that absorbed light. It didn't have headlights, didn't reflect ours, and it wasn't moving away. Micro reward. Recognition of anomaly. My pulse spiked. Johnson tensed beside me, whispering, "What the hell is that?" I had no answer. Only the creeping realization that the fog was part of them, a medium for the watchers. The windshield wipers flicked furiously. Figures appeared in pairs, scattered along the roadside, emerging and vanishing, always at the edge of perception. The radio hissed continuously, static voices pleading, warning, commanding. I realized with cold certainty. This fog was alive in a way that we couldn't understand, a corridor where perception bent to its will. Open loop. If the fog could shape what we saw, could it trap us entirely? I focused on the road, counting lines in the cracked shoulder, trying to ground myself. Every so often, headlights reflected something unexpected. Shapes crouched, eyes shining, faintly, indistinct but undeniably watching. My hand shook despite, gripping the wheel. Johnson glanced at me, eyes wide, the same tension mirrored. Micro reward, shared understanding, escalation of dread. Then, abruptly, the fog thinned. One instant we were enveloped. The next the trees opened, revealing the familiar stretch of road leading back to the county line. Relief surged briefly, but the air still hummed with static, the unplaceable voices lingering in our minds. We both knew we had been observed, possibly tested. I tried to recall the figures, the shapes, the whispers. Every recollection felt fragmentary, as if the fog had scrubbed portions of memory. Open loop, what had we seen? And what remained unseen, following waiting? The realization settled in both of us. This patrol had crossed a threshold, a space where normal rules no longer applied, and that space existed just beyond sight. Even now, back at the station, the fog's residue lingers in my thoughts. Streetlights flicker oddly. Shadows feel closer, and every heavy mist brings a shiver I can't shake. Johnson avoids the road I drove, checks mirrors obsessively, and I do the same. Micro reward. The story survives, awareness heightens, but the dread remains. They weren't just in the fog. They were part of it, and perhaps always would be, watching from places we cannot reach, unseen yet entirely present. I know now that certain stretches of the county road are not just dangerous. They are alive in a way that bends perception, that tests reality. We survive, but I understand that survival doesn't erase what was witnessed. Open loop. Will we ever patrol this road again? And if we do, will we encounter the same watchers or something entirely new? Even as I recount this, I feel the fog pressing at the edges of my memory, teasing what I barely remember. Every thought of the county road sends a prickle across my skin, a warning. It exists beyond sight, beyond understanding, and someday it may call again. The fear is quiet now, but it hums beneath everything. The fog waits, patient. The watchers wait. And somewhere in that drifting white, we are still being observed. I saw it before I understood it. A shape materializing out of the fog, still as the air around it. At first, I thought it was a tree branch caught in the haze, but the outline was wrong. Too upright, too deliberate. I slowed the car, my eyes straining to the shifting white, and the shape didn't move, didn't waver, just stood there, watching or waiting. Johnson muttered something behind me, but even his voice sounded small, swallowed by the thick, wet air. It was a figure. I knew it before I wanted to. Its edges shimmered like it was part fog itself, almost transparent, yet it blocked the light. The headlights didn't cut through it evenly. They bent around the figure, as if the air itself was rejecting clarity. Micro reward, a sudden recognition of the unnatural, and a spike of adrenaline that sharpened every sense. My pulse thudded in my ears. We passed it slowly, tires whispering against wet asphalt. I thought it would vanish once we were beside it. It didn't. Instead, it seemed to stretch along the roadside, keeping pace without moving, a silent rider we couldn't see fully. I swerved slightly, heart tightening. Open loop. Was it following the road or following us? Johnson's hand hovered near the radio, hesitating. I didn't want to speak, didn't want to break the fragile silence. The fog shifted, and for a brief moment, I caught 2 points of light where eyes might have been dim, reflective, unblinking. Relief flickered. Perhaps it was only a trick of light. Then a branch snapped somewhere behind us, closer than the fog should allow, and the figure was gone, leaving only the heavy, empty white. Pattern interrupt. The environment itself seemed alive. I drove on, telling myself we were imagining it, that fatigue and stress were bending perception. But the road ahead felt wrong. Shapes loomed where none should. Shadows pulled unnaturally under the trees. Every turn of the wheel brought another flicker of the edge of vision. A hand, a head, a curve of fabric. Then nothing. Micro reward. Confirmation that observation alone held meaning, even if we couldn't fully comprehend it. The radio crackled again, static merging with something that almost sounded like laughter, faint, distorted, like a memory replaying wrong. Johnson glanced at me sharply, eyes wide. The feeling had grown between us. We were not alone, and whatever was had no need to move like we did. Open loop. What were we looking at, and what did it want? I slowed further as a figure emerged again, just ahead, stationary, legs invisible, torso dissolving into the fog. I felt my stomach tighten. The car felt too small, The road too long. Trees leaned inward as if pressing us down, pressing us to stop. I tried to count the trees, anchor myself in something real, but every number flickered in my mind, uncertain. Pattern interrupt. Reality itself felt fragile. We passed by, headlights catching fleeting glimpses, an arm too long, a head angled wrong, but each glimpse lasts a heartbeat, then nothing. Silence returned, heavy and expectant. I realized the figure hadn't moved. It hadn't disappeared. It simply existed in the space we couldn't fully see. Micro reward. Understanding that our perception was flawed, elevating fear without immediate danger. The road stretched on, yet every turn revealed another figure, another watcher. Some crouched, some leaned, some just hovered. None spoke, none moved. Just silent witnesses, absorbing our presence. I wanted to stop, to leave, but the fog around us seemed to thicken the further we drove. Open loop. Was the road leading us, or were we wandering into it? I glanced at Johnson, who avoided looking directly at the roadside, as if the act itself would summon the watchers closer. My own eyes refused to stay fixed, darting, searching, catching fleeting forms that dissolved before recognition. The fear was no longer external. It seeped into our minds, a creeping unease that made reasoning difficult. Pattern interrupt, psychological escalation. We reached a curve where the fog was almost impenetrable. The car's lights revealed a shape directly ahead. Too large for a person, too still for an animal. A silhouette with edges that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I braked, the tires whispering in protest. The figure remained, unblinking, patient. Micro reward, tangible manifestation of the fear we'd been building. Then as we slowed, it blurred, becoming part fog, part shadow, dissolving yet still present. I realized with creeping certainty that stopping wouldn't make it vanish. It existed beyond the rules we understood, tied to the fog itself. Open loop. Could we leave, or were we trapped in perception, trapped in its gaze? The radio hissed the final time, a single word clear amidst the static. Observe. It was not a warning. It was a command. I felt the weight of it in my chest. The fog pressing closer, the figures lingering at impossible angles. Johnson's hand clenched the dashboard. I felt the same dread gnawing in my stomach. Pattern interrupt. Escalation into direct psychological manipulation. We drove faster, not daring to look, yet in peripheral vision. A shape mirrored our motion, moving without moving, watching, silent. Relief came fleetingly whenever we reached a break in the fog, only to vanish as we entered another pocket of white. Micro reward, survival instinct, temporary grounding. Eventually, the fog thinned enough to see the county line markers, familiar yet slightly warped, as if the space itself had stretched our journey. The figures were gone, or at least they let us believe they were. But the memory lingered, the pressure of unseen eyes, the whispering static in the corners of our minds. Open loop. Had we escaped, or had we only been allowed to continue? Even now, when fog drifts over the county road, I feel their presence, silent, patient, existing in the gaps of vision. The unease doesn't vanish. It waits, persistent. Micro reward. Realization that the world is not always as it seems, that some watchers exist just beyond sight, and that we are never fully alone on that road. I can't shake the feeling that the silent rider is still out there, part of the fog, part of the road, observing. And someday, if the fog thickens just right, I know we'll see it again, not in the headlights, but in the spaces we refuse to notice, waiting for the moment we finally look too long. I heard at first as a faint scratching, almost like fingernails dragging across metal. At first, I told myself it was a branch, a stray animal brushing the side of the car. But the rhythm was deliberate, slow, almost impatient. I froze, hand hovering over the radio, heartbeat a hammer in my chest. Johnson's eyes met mine, wide in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Neither of us spoke, but I knew we both heard it. The sound shifted, coming from the passenger side now. I swiveled my head slowly, scanning to the fog that had rolled in thicker than before, curling around the car like it had weight. The metal frame groaned under some invisible pressure, small dents forming, as if fingers had pressed too hard. Relief trickled through me. Maybe it was just fatigue playing tricks. But then came the softest click unmistakable. The car door handle twitched. I didn't breathe, didn't dare. Johnson cleared his throat, voice barely a whisper. "Do you see that?" I nodded, though I didn't want to confirm out loud. The air inside the car felt heavy, saturated with tension. Every shadow seemed to stretch, pull, and lean closer. The fog outside swirled unnaturally, twisting around shapes that didn't belong to trees or roadside markers. Open loop. What could be strong enough to manipulate a car door without being seen? Another scratch, slower now, measured, almost teasing. I leaned back, instinctively, as the dashboard lights flickered. Micro reward, confirmation that this wasn't imagination. Something was there outside, or maybe it was closer than that. I considered locking the doors, but the locks were sluggish, reluctant, like the car itself resisted sealing us in. Pattern interrupt. Even our own vehicle had become unpredictable. I glimpsed movement in the fog, just past the windshield. A shape crouched low, still, impossible to identify. Then nothing. Johnson's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. I grabbed his wrist, squeezing, warning him without words. We didn't need to speak to know that reaching out could invite it in. A low, dragging sound began from the back of the car. Tires? No. Something sliding along the metal frame, tracing the roof, the edges circling. The fog outside thickened with every second, a living wall pressing closer, and I realized the car wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a trap, a cage whose walls weren't concrete but perception itself. Open loop. Was it testing us? Probing for weakness? The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint tapping. Soft, deliberate, each tap echoing in the hollow inside the car. I leaned forward, peering out the side window. The fog glistened, wet and silver under the lights. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a face press against the glass, features blurred and shifting, eyes impossibly large. Then the shape vanished, leaving only the fog and the silence, heavier than before. Micro reward, a glimpse, a confirmation that it had formed, even if temporary. The tapping began again, now higher, along the roof. My pulse spiked. Each beat a countdown in my head. Johnson's hand quivered against the steering wheel. I felt a pressure against my back, subtle but unmistakable, like someone leaning in close enough that breathing would touch skin if it were human. I spun around. Nothing. Open loop. Had it actually entered, or were we imagining it? Static hiss from the radio. Faint whispers threading through the white noise. The words weren't clear, just tone, intent, observation, presence. I shivered. Pattern interrupt. The sound wasn't random. It was communication, or a warning, or a provocation. The car shuddered slightly, as if acknowledging some unseen force. The handles twitched again, light scratches against the seal. I grabbed a flashlight from the console, swinging it methodically outside. Fog swallowed the beam almost instantly, shapes twisting in the light, bending like reflections in water. My stomach churned. The car had become a small island of safety, surrounded by an ocean of uncertainty. Micro reward. The flashlight's beam confirmed the environment was mutable, manipulated, not natural. Then came the softest whisper against the window, right beside my ear. Not through the glass, not a sound from outside, but inside, brushing the edge of perception. Johnson jumped. I forced myself to stay calm, mind racing. Was it inside? Had it crossed the threshold we thought solid? Open loop. What existed beyond the door, beyond what we could see or hear? A low thud against the roof. I ducked instinctively. Another thud, closer. The rhythm began. Tap, tap, pause, like a heartbeat counting down. I realized the car was no longer a barrier. It was a stage, and we were the observed, trapped in an interaction we didn't understand. I tried to speak, but the words stuck. My mouth felt dry, tongue heavy. Johnson muttered something under his breath. An apology, a curse, a prayer. I couldn't tell. The fog outside shifted with a movement inside the car, shapes twisting to fill the spaces we weren't looking at. Micro reward, awareness that fear itself shaped perception, giving the watcher form. The scratching slowed, then stopped. Silence pressed in, almost unbearable. I thought maybe it had left. Relief flared, but short-lived. because the handles twitched once more, as if reminding us that the boundary we believed solid was temporary. Pattern interrupt. Even when absent presence lingered, I forced myself to look around, the interior small, familiar, but no longer ours. Shadows pooled unnaturally, corners darker than physics allowed, reflections in mirrors that didn't match reality. My pulse didn't slow. Micro reward. Recognition that survival was still possible through observation and attention. Finally, the sound vanished entirely. The fog outside remained thick, concealing, patient. Johnson exhaled shakily, leaning back. I sat, hands on the wheel, not daring to move, not daring to breathe too loudly. Open loop. Had it really gone? Or was it waiting for another lapse, another distraction? The radio crackled once more, brief static, then clear. Do not forget. The words lingered in the air, intangible yet oppressive. I swallowed hard, understanding that the car door hadn't just been challenged, it had been a test, and we had only passed by accident or by tolerance of the watcher's design. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every shadow against the walls, brought it back. The memory of the tapping, of the handle twitching, of the whisper that wasn't quite outside, it lingered in me. Open loop. The watchers don't need to be visible to touch you, to leave marks on perception, on the mind. Even now, when I see a car parked alone in fog, I feel the weight of those moments. The door could twitch again. The sound could return. And I can't stop wondering, what else waits, just outside sight, testing, observing, patient and silent, waiting for the moment we think we're safe. I caught it first in the corner of my eye, shifting just beyond the fog's edge. At first, I thought it was another patrol light, a trick of the mist curling along the roadside. But then Johnson muttered, voice tight, "It's there, again." I didn't look straight at it, but my stomach dropped. The shape moved with us, not ahead, not behind, but perfectly keeping pace, impossibly synchronized with the car. The fog pressed close, thick and wet against the windows, muffling every sound except our own breathing. I tried to rationalize, maybe a jogger, someone taking a shortcut, but the timing was wrong, too precise, too deliberate. The figure stayed just beyond clear sight, a shadow with no substance, yet undeniable in its presence. Open loop. What was it, and why was it matching our speed so exactly? The tires whispered against wet asphalt. Each rotation seemed to echo, a muted metronome against the silence that had settled over the road. I could feel the tension in Johnson's shoulders, see it in the way his knuckles whitened around the wheel. I wanted to turn on the spotlight, flood the fog with light, expose it, but something made me hesitate. Part of me didn't want to know too much. Movement flickered on the side mirror, not just light, but shape, for a brief moment. It seemed like a person standing impossibly tall, hunched just slightly, waiting for us to notice. The second I shifted my gaze fully, it vanished, swallowed by the fog. Micro reward. Confirmation. It existed outside imagination, but that confirmation carried unease heavier than any absence could. Johnson swallowed hard, whispering, "It shouldn't be able to do that." His words trembled, almost lost the hum of the engine. I felt it too, a creeping realization that the rules of the space were bending. Open loop. Was it bound by physics or by something else entirely? The car dipped over a small rise, and I thought I glimpsed movement in the trees. Shadows detaching and flowing like smoke toward us. I blinked. Nothing, but the unease persisted. Pattern interrupt. Even our peripheral vision had become unreliable, betraying us in tiny, insidious ways. We slowed to a crawl, each second stretching, giving the fog more space to crawl over the hood and cling to the windows. And then it moved closer, not forward, but somehow beside us, the shadows stretching, dissolving, reforming in impossible angles. It wasn't human, yet it mirrored us in ways that made the mind real. Micro reward. An understanding that our perception itself was being toyed with, reshaped by an external force. I reached for the radio, desperate for any chatter, any voice from dispatch. Static, a low hum undercut it, almost tonal, like the air itself was vibrating with intent. Johnson tried. 2. Nothing. The emptiness outside wasn't just fog. It was silence amplified, thick with expectation. The figure shifted again, just outside the headlights. I could feel it there, moving in tandem. Precise. Heartbeat quickened, pulse pounding against my temples. It didn't advance or retreat, just mirrored, a specter perfectly timed with the car. Open loop. Was it alive or some echo of reality itself? Suddenly, the fog thickened in front, condensing like smoke into forms, tendrils wrapping around the road ahead. I could barely see the line of pavement. The shadows stayed with us, a dark silhouette suspended in mist, refusing to be lost. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles cracking under pressure. Pattern interrupt. The environment itself seemed complicit, a stage set to amplify dread. Johnson muttered something about leaving, about turning around. I considered it, but the thought felt wrong, like fleeing would trigger something we couldn't comprehend. Instead, we pressed forward, moving slowly, each meter of victory, each glance into the fog a test. Micro reward, control, however tenuous, still existed in motion. Then the figure shifted in a way that made my stomach lurch. Its reflection appeared in the windshield, distorted, too tall, its form bending in unnatural angles. I jerked my head back. Nothing, but the reflection had been real. My mind couldn't reconcile what I'd seen. Open loop. Was a reflection a warning or just another layer of manipulation? The fog thinned just slightly, enough for headlights to catch glimmers on what looked like ground-level debris. But debris that moved, small, quick shadows, darting in peripheral, vanishing the moment we tried to focus. The sense of being surrounded grew. The car no longer a vessel but fragile bubble in a sea of unseen eyes. Johnson exhaled shakily, muttering under his breath. I didn't need him to explain. The rhythm of the shadow, the unnatural timing, the impossibility of its movement. Everything told us we were no longer alone in conventional sense. The car, our sanctuary, felt compromised, as if the very fog had a will. Micro reward. Awareness gave a faint, dangerous comfort. That understanding is a first defense against terror. I tried speaking, voice cracking. What do you want? No answer, but I felt it. Pressure, intention, something almost tactile pressing against the mind. Pattern interrupt. It wasn't only following, it was engaging, testing us, assessing reactions. The headlights flickered. Johnson cursed, trying to switch. The beam swung, slicing through thick fog, illuminating a stretch of road, empty, and yet, in the corner of my vision, the shadow lingered, a perfect, silent twin to our motion. Micro reward, proof of presence, undeniable, even as reality warped. We moved slower, inch by inch, careful not to provoke, careful not to look too directly, and yet the shadow adapted, flowing in perfect symmetry, a moving mirror to our fears. Open loop. If we stopped, would it vanish or close? And I realized we weren't just being followed. We were participants in a pattern we couldn't break, bound to the rhythm of its observation. Every breath we took, every blink, every turn of the wheel, all cataloged, mirrored, responded to. The fog began to thin marginally as the road leveled. Light from distant street lamps faintly touched the edges of the mist, revealing glimpses of roadside markers. Yet each shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally toward the car, bridging distance in impossible ways. Micro reward. Spatial awareness returned slightly, confirming movement, but at a price. The figure's adaptation. Johnson finally whispered, "We're not driving, we're being driven." I felt it too, the realization sinking in like cold water. Not by the car, not by physics, but by the watching presence pacing us, an invisible hand on the leash. Pattern interrupt. Understanding escalates dread. Comprehension is horror in its own right. For miles we drove in a suspended rhythm. Headlights cutting through shifting fog, shadow following. Always just outside sight, yet omnipresent. Every bend brought anticipation. Every straightaway gave brief relief, but the tension never fully released. Open loop. What happens if we stop? Can the watcher only move with us? Or is patience infinite? Finally, a break in the fog allowed distant houses to appear. Windows dark, streets deserted. The figure vanished, or maybe retreated, choosing its moment. Micro reward. A fleeting sense of space, a sliver of control returning. but the unease lingered, heavier than the fog itself. Even now, I remember the car moving through that unnatural fog, shadow in perfect cadence beside us, silence broken only by the tires on wet asphalt. We were alone, yet never alone, and I can't shake the certainty that the watcher moves differently than we do, exists outside what we see, waiting for the next curve, the next pause. Open loop. Somewhere in that fog, patience remains eternal, unseen, unbroken. I hit the turn signal, thinking we'd missed the last exit, but the road stretched ahead like it had no end. Street lights flickered in the distance, faint and irregular, and for a moment I wondered if we'd driven into some parallel stretch of asphalt that wasn't supposed to exist. The lines on the road blurred in the rain, slick and unsteady under the tires. Johnson glanced at me, unease in his eyes, that same tight jaw, but he said nothing. Neither did I. Curiosity, tension, rising fear. Everything pressed against the car like the fog outside wanted in. The map on my phone glowed dimly, but the GPS spun like it had lost its mind. It says we're going straight. I muttered, my voice small in the car. Yet nothing looked right. The diner we passed last week? Gone. The gas station on the corner? Only empty asphalt, no pumps, no light. Open loop. Had we missed a turn, or had the world itself shifted around us? Rain tapped against the windshield like fingers drumming a slow rhythm, punctuating the silence. Headlights carved a tunnel through darkness, but every bend felt longer, the distance stretching unnaturally. Johnson tried to joke, half laugh, half whimper, but the words fell flat, swallowed by the road ahead. Micro reward. The faint relief of shared recognition, but it carried the bitter taste of fear. I saw a movement in the rearview mirror, a flash, a shadow, but when I blinked it was gone. Was it a deer, another car, or something else? Pattern interrupt. My peripheral vision became unreliable, questioning my own senses. I gripped the wheel tighter, heartbeat loud in my ears. Pulse a warning I couldn't ignore. The road seemed to loop back on itself. Landmarks appeared, then vanished as if reality itself was folding around us. Trees arched over the asphalt, their wet leaves brushing against invisible thresholds, whispering in the wind. I realized, dread settling in my chest, that familiar meant nothing here. Open loop. If nothing is recognizable, how do we know we're still on the right path? Or if there even is one? Johnson tapped the brakes lightly, and I noticed the tires made a sound that didn't belong. Metallic, thin, almost a groan under the asphalt. My stomach turned. I wanted to tell him to keep moving, but every instinct screamed caution. Micro reward. Awareness gave control, even if fragile. The fog grew thicker. It pooled in low spots, curling around street signs, muffling our headlights, swallowing distance. Every reflection on the wet pavement seemed wrong, elongated, angled where physics shouldn't allow. Pattern interrupt. The world was becoming a mirror of itself, distorted, playing tricks we couldn't fully see. I tried speaking, a shaky question about our route. No answer came, except a faint rustle of leaves outside. Silence became a weight pressing against the windows, pressing inside the car too. The familiar sound of the world, traffic, distant music, a dog barking, were all gone. The road was empty, endless, the night unbroken. Then a faint light appeared in the distance, a glow on the horizon that seemed like a town, like salvation. But as we drove closer, the light didn't grow. It shifted sideways, staying the same distance away, always just out of reach. My chest tightened. Open loop. Was this a trick of the fog, or a presence guiding us somewhere we didn't want to go? The windshield wipers struggled against the rain, leaving streaks and shadows that danced across the dash. I could see Johnson's reflection, pale, tense, eyes darting. But even his image felt strange, elongated, like the fog had begun to twist everything. Micro reward, a small comfort in recognizing him. Yet the form of reality seemed unstable. Branches scraped the side of the car briefly, though there were no trees close enough. A distant echo, faint laughter? I couldn't tell. Pattern interrupt. Sound became unreliable, making every sensory input suspect. My mind raced, trying to piece together cause and effect, but nothing fit. I spotted a familiar curve, the one near the old mill. Relief surged. Then I realized the mill wasn't there. Just black emptiness where memory insisted it should be. My stomach sank. Open loop. If memory fails, what do we trust? The road? The car? Ourselves? The rain lessened, but the fog remained thick and breathing, moving in subtle waves across the asphalt. Headlights revealed the faint outlines of telephone poles, impossibly leaning, not touching the ground where they should. Micro reward. Recognition of form, yet warped enough to amplify dread. Time slipped. Minutes felt like hours. Each bend, each straightaway, a test. Shadows flickered just beyond the headlights. Shapes that seemed to move against the direction of the car. Johnson whispered a name, but I didn't catch it. His fear was contagious. Yet I fought to stay present, noting every detail, grounding myself in observation. Pattern interrupt. Internal dialogue became a lifeline amidst the uncertainty. A patch of road glistened differently. Water pooled unnaturally deep, reflecting not our headlights, but another light, warm, flickering. I slowed, peering. Nothing but the reflection of trees that weren't there, and for a moment, I swore I saw figures moving beneath the surface. Open loop. Were these hallucinations or a hidden truth lurking beneath the road itself? The map spun again, arrows pointing every direction at once. Panic bubbled, but I forced control, steering carefully. I tried to follow the most logical path, the road that seemed continuous, though continuity felt meaningless. Micro reward, the illusion of choice, though it came with fear. Ahead, a street lamp flickered violently, casting long shadows into fog. And in one stretch, the light caught something, a figure standing at the edge of the road. My breath caught. It moved unnaturally, twisting in angles that shouldn't be possible, then vanished as the fog rolled in. Pattern interrupt. A sudden visual horror, unexplainable, heightening tension. Johnson gripped the door handle, silent, staring. I felt my own body tighten, muscles coiled like springs, heartbeat sinking with the tires on wet asphalt. The fog seemed to pulse in time with us, alive. Open loop. Was it sentient or just the world unraveling? The road split into two paths. Both looked identical. Both disappeared into white nothingness. We hesitated. An eternity compressed into seconds. I realized the real danger wasn't wrong turns. It was being trapped in a place where all directions led nowhere. Micro reward, awareness of stakes. Faint clarity in an impossible situation. Then, headlights reflected off a sign ahead. The words made no sense. Letters twisting, shifting as if written in liquid. I blinked. Johnson looked, then turned away, unable to reconcile the shapes. Pattern interrupt. Even language betrayed us, the world itself distorting. The rain stopped, but the fog thickened further, a living wall wrapping the car. My mind screamed to turn around, but the path back was gone, erased as if never there. Open loop. If forward is all that remains, what waits at the end? Shapes shifted in the mist, brief glimpses, human-like, then impossible. Shadows lengthened, shortened, dancing along the road's edge. Johnson's hand shook on the wheel. I felt mine shake too, but forced focus, noting every detail, committing each impossible sight to memory. Micro reward, control through observation, even amidst horror. The road seemed endless, the world outside impossible. And yet, somewhere ahead, faint lights, too far, too still, promise a destination or a trap. My chest tightened, realizing that reaching them might answer nothing or might answer everything. Pattern interrupt. Anticipation and dread intertwined, escalating stakes. Minutes or hours passed. I can't tell which. Only the road, the fog, the impossible turns, the vanishing landmarks, constantly shifting, always moving. Open loop. What exists beyond the fog, and will we ever reach it? Johnson finally muttered, voice barely audible. We're not on the map anymore. I nodded, silently agreeing. Micro reward. Acknowledgement of shared reality. A tether in the unraveling. But the tether trembled under the weight of uncertainty. The fog pressed closer. Lights flickered, and the road ahead disappeared once more. We moved forward, knowing wrong turns might not even matter here. And somewhere, ahead or beside us, the world waited, silent, watching, patient. I turned the wheel at the junction again, expecting the familiar curve, the street light, the little diner sign that always marked the way. But it was gone. Every turn led me back here, to the same split, the same cracked asphalt stretching under sky that had grown impossibly dark. Panic curled in my chest, hot and heavy. The fog hugged the road like it belonged there, like it was alive, pressing against the car, blurring the edges of reality. Johnson muttered something under his breath. Something I didn't catch, and I realized we hadn't spoken in minutes. Not a word. The only sound was the hum of the tires on wet asphalt and the whisper of rain that seemed distant, almost imagined. The junction repeated, like the world had looped itself into a puzzle we weren't meant to solve. Open loop. Was the road actually moving, or were we trapped in some kind of temporal trap? I checked the GPS. Nothing. It spun in place, arrows twitching violently, numbers flashing that didn't make sense. I tried switching it off, restarting anything, but it mocked me silently. Micro reward. At least I understood what failure looked like. At least I had that. But the relief was tiny, fleeting, swallowed by the fog pressing into every pane of glass. Ahead, the faint outline of a street sign shimmered through the mist. I blinked. It should have said Route 19 or Main Street. Something familiar. But the letters twisted, folding over themselves, liquid and impossible. My chest tightened. Pattern interrupt. Reality itself bending under our gaze. I tried the radio. Static. A faint voice appeared, too garbled to comprehend, then vanished. Johnson leaned forward, squinting. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if we both heard the same thing. If either of us could trust our ears. Open loop. Who or what was trying to reach us through the static? The junction repeated again. This time, I recognized the curve, or thought I did. Relief surged briefly, a small anchor, but when I followed it, the same cracked road stretched ahead, identical to before. My stomach turned. How could the same road exist twice? Or was it 3 times now? 4? The world outside the headlights had lost all meaning. Micro reward. Noticing repetition gave me a sense of pattern, however terrifying. The rain eased, but the fog thickened. Trees lined the road, black shapes with branches curling like fingers. Shadows clung unnaturally, stretching across the pavement, elongating and shrinking as if breathing. Pattern interrupt. Movement where none should exist, the laws of physics ignored. I tried to speak, to break the tension, but my voice sounded alien to me, distant, swallowed by the night. Johnson's breathing was sharp in the confined space of a patrol car, panicked but measured, and it grounded me, briefly, in a small reality. Micro reward. Even fear shared feels slightly less isolating. The junction repeated yet again. I counted. Left, right, straight, left, right. None of it mattered. Every choice returned me here. Anxiety gnawed at my bones. Open loop. If every path leads to the same place, how do we escape? Was there an escape? A flicker of headlights appeared behind us. Relief, fleeting and immediate. Another car, maybe help, maybe something else. My hand trembled over the wheel, but as we approached, the lights vanished. No vehicle, no reflection, nothing. Pattern interrupt. Hope twisted into fear, escalating tension. The road stretched into an endless tunnel of white mist. I strained to see beyond a few yards. Trees loomed on either side, dark, impossible in shape, their roots or shadows curling toward the asphalt. My chest tightened with every inch we drove forward. Micro reward. At least we were moving, still alive, still aware. But the cost was mounting. I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror, a shadow flickering, impossible to place. Johnson noticed it too. I could see the reflection of his quick glance, a silent acknowledgement of shared terror. Open loop. What was moving with us? So quiet we could barely sense it. The air grew colder, unnatural, and my breath fogged in the small cabin. Rain no longer fell, but the asphalt gleamed as though soaked, reflecting shapes that weren't ours. I saw a figure, or thought I did, at the edge of the fog, human-shaped, impossibly still. My stomach twisted. Pattern interrupt. A visual impossibility, sharpening dread. Time seemed irrelevant. Minutes stretched into something longer, heavier. Each junction, each turn, the repetition crushed hope and sanity alike. Micro reward, awareness that we were still conscious, still capable of observation, even as the world warped. The GPS spun again, then died completely, black screen. I tried the radio, nothing but static and whispers we couldn't decipher. Open loop. If all tools fail, what guides us now? Instinct? Luck? Or something outside understanding? A shape appeared ahead through the fog. A streetlight or figure? Maybe both. My heart slammed. As we drew closer, it twisted impossibly, folding into fog like smoke uncatchable. Pattern interrupt. What we hoped for became incomprehensible. Johnson's hand touched mine briefly. A small, grounding gesture. Micro reward. Human connection amidst chaos. A reminder that at least we had each other. But offered no answers, no safety. The junction repeated. Again and again. The same cracked asphalt. The same curves. The same trees looming like sentinels of a place that wasn't meant to exist. Open loop. If the road itself is sentient, does it decide who escapes? A distant sound, faint but clear, broke the oppressive silence. A soft scraping, not of metal, not of tires. Something moving alongside the car, keeping pace, hidden in the fog. Pattern interrupt. New threat, invisible but sensed. The air thickened, heavy with dampness, and something else. Something metallic, sharp, almost like fear itself condensed. Micro reward. Sensory detail grounding us, even as dread intensified. We drove on. Each turn, each repeated junction, each shadow and flicker, layered on top of the last, escalating panic, but also forcing focus, forcing awareness. The fog pressed, shapes shifted, sounds teased, and the road stretched endlessly. Finally, for a moment, I saw what looked like a break in the fog, a faint light far ahead. My chest tightened with hope and fear both. Open loop. Was this salvation or something waiting, patient and unseen? We moved toward it, tires humming over the endless asphalt, senses sharp, hearts pounding, knowing that each turn could bring revelation or annihilation. The junction repeated, and I realized we weren't lost by mistake. The road wanted us here, and somewhere in the fog, something was waiting to meet us. I felt it first in the hum of the engine, a subtle offbeat that shouldn't have been there, like the world itself had skipped a beat. The dashboard clock, steady all evening, blinked violently. 12:37, then 12:02, then 12:57. I tapped it, cursed it, even shook my head, but each glance revealed a new, impossible time. Johnson noticed it too, his eyes narrowing as he muttered, "That's not right." Pattern interrupt. Time itself fracturing around us. The radio crackled. A familiar voice distorted, as if underwater, stretched and warped. Repeat, unknown vehicle at mile. The words broke into static, then a slow, deliberate hum that set my teeth on edge. I tried to respond, but my own voice sounded strange and cabined, slowed and pitched oddly, like I was trapped speaking through distorted echo. Micro reward. At least I knew we weren't imagining this entirely. Something tangible was wrong. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The fog outside shifted unnaturally, dense and swirling, almost alive. Streetlights flickered, dimming and brightening in irregular intervals, creating moving shadows that didn't match the trees. Open loop. Were the lights responding to us, or to something else out there? Johnson reached for the radio again, hand trembling. "I can't, it's..." His words cut off, as if swallowed mid-air. The static hissed, then the voice returned, slower, deliberate. "You shouldn't be here. Time bends." A chill spread across my back, a visceral reminder that we weren't alone, that the fog wasn't merely mist but conduit, a lens for something beyond comprehension. The clocks continued their chaotic dance. Every instrument on the dash seemed to pulse in defiance of reality. Speedometer flickered. 0, 75, 14, 60. Each reading lasted only a heartbeat before shifting again. My mind tried to rationalize electrical fault interference, but even rational thoughts sounded hollow against the oppressive hum of warped time. Pattern interrupt. Familiar objects betraying us. A distant streetlight ahead seemed impossibly bright, Yet my reflection in the window grew longer, distorted. My arm appeared bent in ways it shouldn't. Shadows crawling up my neck as if climbing. Micro reward. Noticing details kept me anchored to a sliver of reality, even as it warped. The fog thickened, dragging along the car as if it had weight. The trees outside seemed to stretch, their branches writhing slowly, casting unfamiliar patterns on the wet asphalt. I could hear a faint tick-tock, though no clock was nearby, syncing with the warped rhythm of the radio. Open loop. Was time itself pulsating, guiding us, mocking us? Johnson's hand tapped the dashboard nervously. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I shook my head but realized I had. A shadow detached itself from the fog, elongated unnaturally, bending along the road beside us without moving a tire, keeping pace perfectly. Pattern interrupt. An impossible presence, silent yet synchronized with the world's distortion. The car's clock jumped again, this time landing on 11:11, a number that felt like a warning. I could feel my pulse in my throat, each beat echoing against the warped rhythm around us. Every tick, every warped word on the radio, each flicker outside amplified that unease. Micro reward, awareness that the pattern existed, even if we couldn't decode it fully. Suddenly, the radio voice warped further, repeating words in reverse, syllables spilling backward. "Here shouldn't be you." I winced, leaning back, heart hammering. Johnson gripped the wheel tighter, eyes wide in shared terror. Open loop. If communication itself is distorted, how do we reach the outside world or each other? The rear view mirror caught something, a figure, glimmering in the fog. Each glance made it closer, yet never fully formed. I blinked, and it stretched longer, a dark silhouette bending along the contours of the road. Pattern interrupt, reality responding, or something feeding off our perception. Clocks on the dash began a synchronized erratic pulse. 12:44, 12:09, 12:52, then blank. The hum of the engine shifted pitch, rising and falling, almost like a heartbeat. I realized my own breathing was in sync, uncomfortably in tune with this distortion. Micro reward. Recognition that our bodies were adapting to or being manipulated by this temporal anomaly. A faint scratching sound came from outside, rhythmic and deliberate. I couldn't place its source, but it matched no tire or tree movement. Open loop. Was it the fog itself, or something moving within it, marking time in ways we couldn't grasp? I glanced at Johnson. His reflection in the passenger window wasn't right. His eyes lagged slightly behind his head's motion, a subtle but sickening temporal delay. Pattern interrupt. People, even familiar, untrustworthy in warp time. The fog parted momentarily, revealing a lamppost flickering in impossible intervals. Shadows danced along the asphalt, stretching forward, then recoiling, as if each second existed twice or thrice. Micro reward. Noticing the manipulation allowed me to map, however roughly, the instability around us. Another warped message crackled from the radio. Time, bends, follow, not safe. The words were fragmented, but the intent was unmistakable. Danger was encoded in the very air around us. Open loop. If time bends here, are we chasing it or being chased? The road repeated ahead, familiar curves now doubling back, overlapping, merging in impossible geometries. Trees seemed to have memory, shadows pausing as if acknowledging our passage before continuing their slow crawl. Pattern interrupt. The world itself conscious or merely reflecting fear. I reached to check the GPS dead. Nothing. A flicker of the screen, then dark. Micro reward. One less tool, yet clarity and understanding that reliance was futile. Only observation and instinct remained. Then I saw in the fog, a fleeting glimpse, pale light, shaped human yet impossible. It moved, but not along the road. It shifted between seconds, appearing ahead and behind simultaneously. Open loop. Was this a guardian, a predator, or a reflection of time itself? Johnson's voice shook. "We can't," he stopped. The words vanished in warped radio feedback, replaced by that distorted repetition. "Shouldn't be here." My chest tightened. Pattern interrupt. The world was speaking directly, bending our perception, forcing comprehension without context. The clocks flickered again. 1:23, 12:41, 11:58, blank, then a steady tick, perfectly in sync with the distant, muffled ticking that echoed outside. Micro reward, recognition of rhythm, a thread to cling to amidst chaos. The fog thickened into near solid walls. Pressing on the car, muting all outside sound except for the warped whispers, the ticking, the soft scratches at intervals I couldn't locate. Open loop. If we cannot leave this fog, what waits when we stop moving? Finally, a faint glow appeared far ahead, warmer than the cold distortion surrounding us. I gripped the wheel tighter, Johnson leaning forward, eyes locked, pattern interrupt, a potential exit or a lure. As we approached, the clocks froze. The radio went dead. The world held its breath. My chest pounded, heart hammering against this frozen temple cage. Micro reward. Still alive, still moving, still aware, but nothing else was guaranteed. The glow drew nearer, stretching impossibly, shadows bending unnaturally around it. Open loop. Will we find normal time, or something worse? Waiting beyond comprehension? Each second felt infinite, each shadow alive, each warp tick a reminder that the world outside the cruiser no longer obeyed rules. And somewhere in the fog, just beyond the headlights, I knew something waited, patient, silent, observing, marking the passing of seconds that had lost all meaning. The headlights cut through the fog, carving a narrow path across the wet asphalt. But no matter how far we drove, the feeling didn't fade. It pressed against the cruiser like a living thing, cold and unyielding, a weight that didn't obey distance. Johnson tried to keep his eyes on the road, but I saw him glance at the mirrors, then quickly away, like he thought looking would make it real. Open loop. What is following us, and why can't we shake it? Every turn, every stretch of highway felt familiar and wrong. Landmarks repeated or vanished entirely. Trees leaned oddly, their branches twisting in slow arcs, and the mist seemed to mirror our movement, stretching and thinning, then thickening to trap us. Pattern interrupt. The world itself conspired, reflecting our panic. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting nothing. But sometimes, just beyond the headlights, a shape lingered, a shadow, moving perfectly with us, always at the edge of perception. Not a person, not quite, but undeniably there. Micro reward. At least I could see it. At least I knew we weren't imagining it. Johnson finally broke the silence. Do you feel that? His voice was tight, careful. He gripped the wheel like it could hold him steady against the unseen force. I nodded, though words wouldn't capture it. A presence that wasn't chasing but existing, patient and deliberate. Open loop. Patient for what? The radio crackled, static gnawing at the edges of our nerves. Fragments of distorted voices came through. Warnings? Laughter? It was impossible to tell. Each snippet seemed timed with a shadow, punctuating its presence, a distorted heartbeat in the fog. Pattern interrupt. Even our communication tools betrayed reality. I tried to distract myself, scanning the dashboard, the tires, anything. The clocks ticked normally now, but the road didn't obey normal measures. Every mile felt like two, every curve like a loop we'd already taken. The fog shifted around the car in ways that made the air itself seem viscous, sticky, pressing on the windows. Micro reward, noticing patterns, even broken ones, kept my mind from fracturing completely. We passed a broken streetlight, its glow flickering off the wet road. For a moment, the shadow lingered under it, standing still as if studying us. When we passed, it was gone, then back at the edge of the headlights on the next stretch. Open loop. How could it keep pace without moving? Johnson muttered under his breath, half laughing, half cursing. It's like it's waiting. The words caught in his throat. I felt the same, a gnawing certainty that this thing, this presence, was marking our passage, patient, eternal. Pattern interrupt. The world was no longer just environment. It was witness. Rain began, light at first, then heavier, tapping on the roof in uneven rhythms. The sound was normal, comforting almost, until I realized the droplets fell slightly offbeat with reality. Slightly early, slightly late. Micro reward, sensory anchor, something real. But the anchor shook with each warp tap. I glanced at the mirrors again. The shape never closed in, never ran, never fled. It existed in parallel, an echo of motion, tethered us in ways I didn't understand. Johnson noticed too, his eyes wide, scanning the foggy emptiness behind us. Open loop. Was it a reflection, a predator, or a fragment of ourselves left behind? Time stretched. Minutes became endless, measured in shudders and whispers of static from the radio. Each mile, each curve, felt like we were driving through a dream we couldn't wake from. Pattern interrupt. The ordinary act of moving became a trial. The tires hissed over wet asphalt. I leaned forward, trying to pierce the fog, and caught sight of fleeting shapes. Figures at the roadside, dark and indistinct, watching. One motionless, the next gone, as if swallowed by mist, only to appear again at the periphery of our headlights. Micro reward, confirmation. We weren't alone, and the pattern repeated. Johnson finally broke the silence again. We've driven for miles, there's no end. His voice trembled. I felt it too, an oppressive truth settling like ice in my chest. Even the road didn't obey distance anymore. Open loop. If escape is impossible, what defined pursuit? We passed an abandoned junction. The signs were rusted, barely legible, but familiar. Or maybe memory was failing. Maybe it was a mirror of somewhere else. The shadow or presence lingered just beyond the curve. Waiting, always waiting. Pattern interrupt. The road repeated, but never repeated the same way. The fog closed in further, swallowing sound, light, and perception. The radio gave one last distorted crackle, indecipherable, then silence. Silence thickened, heavier than any sound we'd heard. Micro reward, awareness of silence as a separate entity, a companion, a warning. I felt my pulse hammering in my temples. Each turn, each stretch of road, seemed to extend forever, a loop with no exit. Only the silent observer tethered to us, patient, enduring. Open loop. If we can't leave, are we meant to continue, or are we already trapped? For a brief moment, headlights caught a reflective surface. A puddle, a shard of glass, or maybe an eye. It flickered in recognition before vanishing. Pattern interrupt. Fleeting contact, teasing understanding, then gone. Johnson shook his head, muttering something I couldn't make out. We drove on, headlights slicing through fog, the shadow keeping pace as if tied to our breath, to our motion, to the very act of being here. Micro reward. Recognition of continuity, that despite warped perception, some reality endured. The road curved endlessly, each mile echoing the last, but subtle changes persisted. One tree leaning differently, one shadow lagging a fraction longer. Open loop. The pattern shifted subtly, but always consistent in one truth. We were being followed endlessly, patiently. Rain lashed against a windshield, fog curling around the car, the shadow moving in tandem, silent, still, inexhaustible. My chest ached from tension, from the unending march of impossible miles. Pattern interrupt. The ordinary act of driving had become a test of endurance against an entity beyond comprehension. We reached a patch where the fog thinned slightly, revealing a distant glow. Hope, fleeting and fragile, flickered in my chest. But the shadow didn't waver. It moved with us, merging with the fog, persistent, eternal. Micro reward. Recognition that even the smallest opening offered insight but not escape. I exhaled slowly, try to anchor myself, try to measure breathing against tire hiss, radio static, and distant whispers of warped time. Open loop. If we can hold perception, can we survive what's following, or is survival irrelevant when escape is impossible? Each mile stretched into infinity, yet the shadow remained tethered, silent, watching, enduring. Every flicker of movement, every warped reflection in mirrors, every echo of radio static reminded me that the road no longer belonged to us. It belonged to it. Pattern interrupt. Ownership of space shifted, from the tangible to the uncanny. Johnson gripped the wheel with white-knuckled resolve, but even he knew there was no fleeing, only endurance. Micro reward. Unity and comprehension, even as dread escalated. As we drove, fog curling and twisting, the sense of being followed remained absolute. Every mile, every shadow, every warped reflection hinted that this presence wasn't just behind us. It was part of the road, part of the fog, inseparable, infinite, open loop. If it moves with us endlessly, what waits at the end? If an end exists at all, And in that creeping certainty, a quiet terror settled in my chest. No junction, no light, no landmark could free us. The road was endless, the shadow eternal, and we were lost forever. The call came in just as the sun disappeared behind the trees. A flicker on the scanner that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Small fire, nothing serious. But as soon as we turned off the main road, the forest swallowed the cruiser, and the headlights barely cut through the dark. Shadows stretched long and strange, almost alive. Why was it so quiet here? Open loop. Who or what could be out here in the middle of nowhere? The GPS went flaky almost immediately. Weak signal. Just a little blinking icon that seemed to laugh at our confusion. Johnson muttered something about it being typical for these woods. But I didn't feel typical. There was tension in the air, thick and sticky, like the fog itself had weight. Pattern interrupt. The forest didn't behave normally. The road narrowed, twisting like a ribbon of black silk, wet from a recent rain. A faint glow flickered ahead. At first, I thought it was a fire itself, but it didn't have the erratic pulse of flames. Smooth, intentional, micro reward, a visual anchor in the dark, something to focus on, even if it didn't make sense. We stopped, stepping out carefully. The smell of smoke hung faintly, almost sweet, clinging to the damp air. Leaves rustled underfoot, though no wind moved. That unsettled me more than the dark. Open loop. Was the fire real, or had it been a lure? I scanned the trees. Nothing. Just trunks, shadows, and the occasional gleam of wet bark reflecting our flashlights. But the deeper we went, the more it felt like the forest shifted. Paths we walked yesterday, or at least what we thought we remembered, looked subtly different. Angles changed, distances warped. Pattern interrupt. Memory itself was unreliable here. Johnson pointed ahead, whispering, "There, did you see that?" A shimmer, almost like heat rising, but cold to the touch when I leaned closer. Micro reward, confirmation that something wasn't right, something observable, though incomprehensible. We kept moving, trying to locate the fire, but the forest swallowed the light. Branches scraped the cruiser, as if it belonged to the trees to rearrange themselves. The scanner buzzed intermittently. Voices distorted, fragmented, like echoes of another place. Open loop. Were we being tracked or merely watched? A flicker in the underbrush caught my attention. Movement or reflection? My pulse spiked. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity held me. The air felt charged, alive, like the forest was aware we were intruding. Pattern interrupt. The line between observer and observed blurred. The glow returned, closer now, but still ambiguous. Not a fire. Not anything I could identify. It pulsed, casting long shadows that bent unnaturally. Johnson tensed beside me, gripping the radio, muttering prayers under his breath. Micro reward. Shared recognition of unease, grounding us even as fear escalated. I tried to call it in, describe what we saw, but my words felt inadequate. The radio crackled in response with whispers that weren't our own, fractured and warped. Open loop. Whose voices were those, and why did they mimic our words? We advanced cautiously. Every step made the shadows twist differently, angles bending, shapes elongating. I couldn't tell if the source of the glow moved, or if the forest itself rearranged to create the effect. Pattern interrupt. Perception was no longer reliable. Then a faint heat brushed my hand, though nothing was near. Johnson froze, looking at me like I'd gone insane. Micro reward. Sensory confirmation that something tangible existed, even if unseen. Branches arched overhead, forming shapes that reminded me of faces, twisted and distorted. I blinked and they were gone. Or maybe they never were. Open loop. Were they illusions, warnings, or entities we could not comprehend? The glow flickered again, revealing a clearing. The fire, if fire it had been, was gone. Ashes, faint and cold, lay scattered, but no heat, no smoke rising. Johnson whispered, "How can it vanish like that?" Pattern interrupt. The very object we were pursuing had disappeared entirely. The scanner buzzed, louder this time, the distorted chatter almost urgent. I couldn't understand words, but tone suggested alarm, movement. Micro reward, confirmation that something was still here, somewhere. I noticed footprints, or impressions at least, leading from the clearing. Not ours, not animal. Slender, elongated, unnatural in shape. Open loop. Were these the source of the fire, or something else entirely? We followed them cautiously. Every crunch of leaves underfoot echoed too loud. Shadows moved at the edge of perception, just beyond the light. Johnson's flashlight flickered, then steadied. Pattern interrupt. Equipment itself seemed unreliable, responding to the forest. Not us. The fog thickened suddenly, rolling like a wave, muffling sound, hiding depth. The glow reappeared at the edge of visibility. Teasing, never fully there. Micro reward. Brief glimpses kept us moving forward, invested in the hunt. Then the air went still, too still. Breaths hung, visible in the cold, though it wasn't cold. Silence pressed down, heavier than the fog. Open loop. If the fire was gone, what remained waiting in the woods? A low crackle under the brush startled me. Nothing emerged, yet every instinct told me it had moved closer. Pattern interrupt. The unseen grew more threatening by absence rather than presence. We advanced again, careful, methodical. The glow flickered one last time before vanishing entirely. Nothing. No fire. No warmth. No movement. Micro reward. Comprehension that absence, too, could communicate. I looked at Johnson, his face pale, eyes wide. Neither of us spoke. The forest exhaled around us, indifferent, patient. Open loop. What had lured us here and why? We turned back toward the cruiser. The path felt longer, distorted, though it should have been simple. Branches leaned in, mist curling unnaturally around tires. Pattern interrupt. The exit was as treacherous as the entry, if not more. Back at the cruiser, I exhaled sharply, trying to shake the tension, but the feeling persisted, of being observed, of something unseen lingering just beyond comprehension. Micro reward. Reaching a physical boundary offered temporary relief, but mental unease remained. Johnson started the engine. Headlights cut through fog again, but the forest seemed to retreat reluctantly, not fully releasing us. Open loop. Will we ever leave fully, or was the forest marking its own claim on us? Even as we drove back toward the main road, the glow's absence haunted me. Every shadow, every bend, every rustle of leaves whispered of it, though invisible. Pattern interrupt. The mind-filled gap's reality refused to explain. The scanner quieted. No calls, no static, just the forest, endless and patient. Micro reward, temporary silence, a calm that allowed reflection. I realized then that the fire, or whatever it was, wasn't important. The experience was. The way the woods bent perception, twisted memory, and hinted at something beyond comprehension. Open loop. What waited deeper in these woods? If curiosity or duty ever drew us back? Even as lights of the main road appeared, the unease lingered. Something had followed us, unseen, patient. And I knew instinctively it would not forget. We drove on, quiet. The forest swallowed our echoes, but not our fear. Something remained in the shadows, waiting for another call, another wanderer. I could hear it before I saw it. The faint whispering, threading through the trees like smoke curling around the cruiser. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe branches scraping together. But then Johnson stiffened beside me. His hand froze on the radio, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. The whispers were deliberate, soft, too soft to make sense. Open loop. Who or what was speaking, and why here now? The headlights barely cut through fog. Shadows stretched between the trunks, shifting just at the edge of vision. Not animals, not us, something else, moving, observing. Every instinct told me to drive back, but curiosity and duty pressed me forward. Pattern interrupt. The forest itself seemed alive, responding to us, twisting subtly when we moved. I leaned slightly toward the window, straining to catch the whispers. They weren't words I could understand, just fragments, a cadence that felt wrong. The sound bounced between the trunks, circling us. Micro reward, acknowledgement that the fear was real, tangible, and not just imagination. Johnson flicked the scanner on. Static crackle before a warped voice emerged. Something like our own tones, but distorted. A syllable here, a phrase there. Open loop. Was it a trick of the radio, or something mimicking us? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. We drove slowly, tires crunching leaves and gravel that didn't sound quite normal, almost too soft. The shadows moved with us. Every turn of the cruiser revealed slightly different angles, trees bending just enough to feel unnatural. Pattern interrupt. The forest seemed to rearrange itself around us, mocking the concept of direction. A faint light flickered between the trunks. I froze, unsure if it was a reflection of fire or a glimmer of something else entirely. Micro reward. A visual clue, a tether in the unrelenting dark. But when I blinked, it was gone. Gone. Yet the whispers remained, now rising in pitch, like they were coaxing us further in. I could feel Johnson's tension. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet the whispers were seductive, pulling our attention deeper. Open loop. Why were we being drawn here, and to what end? Branches arched overhead, forming shapes that reminded me of faces. I blinked, and the faces twisted, elongated unnaturally, before melting back into the bark. Pattern interrupt. The line between perception and reality blurred. I could no longer trust my own eyes. The radio crackled again, louder, repeating fragments of the whispers. One phrase stood out, eerily familiar. You shouldn't be here. Micro reward. Confirmation that the sound had meaning, directed specifically at us. I leaned forward, scanning the tree line. Movement. Slender, almost human in silhouette, but wrong. Too tall, too fluid. Open loop. Was it the source of the whispers, or merely another observer? A shadow among shadows? We stopped the cruiser for a moment. Silence fell, heavier than the fog. Even the whispers seemed to pause, as if waiting for us to act. Pattern interrupt. Absence, too, was a tool, a form of pressure I could feel pressing against my chest. Then it returned, a surge of sound circling us. Closer now. Urgent yet still indistinct. Micro reward. Proof that something was actively following, actively aware of our presence. I took a shaky breath, trying to ground myself. The trees swayed, though the air was still. Shadows shifted, and the whispers moved with them, teasing, taunting. Open loop. How could a sound move without a source? Johnson whispered, barely audible, "Do you see it?" I didn't. Not fully. Just glimpses, flickers. Shapes bending unnaturally, disappearing when I tried to focus. Pattern interrupt. The more we looked, the less we understood. We pressed on. Each step seemed to echo in the fog, though no sound should have carried that far. The whispers, fragmented, became a rhythm, a pulse in my skull. Micro reward. Our senses, heightened and alive, confirmed we were not alone. A shadow detached from the tree line. Slow, deliberate, almost floating. I flinched, but it didn't approach, only lingered, watching from the edge of light. Open loop. What did it want, and why did it remain unseen yet unmistakably present? The cruiser's lights flickered. For a moment, the forest seemed to inhale, contracting around us. Pattern interrupt. The environment itself reacted to the tension, almost sentient. Whispers rose again, faster now, overlapping with our own voices on the scanner. Fragments of words, distorted cries, a rhythm that matched our heartbeat. Micro reward, a sensory crescendo confirming the presence, proximity, and intent of whatever followed. I tried to communicate with Johnson, but my words caught in my throat. Every time I opened my mouth, the whispers filled the space, mimicking, twisting, confusing. Open loop. Were we hearing our own fears, or something external, more intelligent? A low glow appeared between the trunks. Not fire, not reflective, just a soft, constant pulse, moving subtly as we did. Pattern interrupt. A visual anchor that defied expectation. Something tangible amidst the uncertainty. I held my flashlight higher, scanning. The shadows recoiled slightly, then advanced in rhythm with the glow. Micro reward. Confirmation that the phenomena interacted with light, or at least our perception of it. We drove on, slowly, cautiously. The forest closed in, whispering with us, moving with us. I realized the whispers weren't just sounds. They were guides, predators, or warnings. Open loop. Were we being lured, tested, or hunted? Every bend revealed slightly different angles of trees, new shadows, and echoes. Pattern interrupt. Familiar paths felt unfamiliar. Memory was unreliable here. The glow vanished suddenly, leaving only shadows and whispers. Micro reward. A pause to catch breath, to feel the environment, to realize the unseen pressure still lingered. I glanced at Johnson. His face mirrored my own unease. Neither of us spoke. The whispers continued, circling, patient, deliberate, open loop. How deep did this go? And could we ever leave with our senses intact? Even as we moved toward the outskirts of the forest, the feeling of eyes, many eyes, lingering in the fog remained. Pattern interrupt. The unseen presence persisted beyond direct observation, a constant psychological weight. The scanner went silent. No voices, no static, just us, the fog, and the knowledge that something unseen trailed our every move. Micro reward, brief clarity, a moment to process, though unease remained. I knew instinctively the forest hadn't released us. The whispers, the shadows, the unnatural shapes, they would remain patient, waiting for another intrusion, another patrol. And in the dark between the trees, I could still hear them, faint but deliberate, echoing as if they had never stopped. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the beam cutting a narrow slice through the fog that seemed thicker than anything I'd ever seen. The light danced over twisted roots, slick rocks, and leaves that glistened like black glass. Something moved ahead, or maybe it wasn't something, just lights, small, hovering, shifting. I swear they weren't reflections. Open loop. What could be moving like that without sound, without a source? Johnson's voice was tight beside me, whispering questions I didn't answer. Every step felt heavier than it should. The ground underfoot wasn't solid. It shifted subtly, almost liquid in texture. My boots sank slightly with each step. Pattern interrupt. The terrain itself felt wrong, unfamiliar, as if the forest had reshaped itself since we entered. The lights flickered again, closer now, and I ran a hand across a gnarled tree. Its bark felt slick, almost moist, and pulsed faintly under my touch. Micro reward, a tactile clue that the environment was alive, or pretending to be. We followed, stepping over roots and through thick underbrush. Every so often, a light would vanish just as we reached it, only to appear somewhere else, teasing us deeper into the fog. Open loop, were the lights leading us somewhere or away from something. A soft crunch echoed behind us. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly, but there was nothing. Only fog, curling and thickening like smoke. Pattern interrupt. Absence is a presence. Fear of what isn't there. Johnson muttered something under his breath. Probably about giving up. I shook my head. We couldn't. Not yet. The lights weren't random. They had a rhythm, a pattern. Following them felt like peeling back the forest skin. Micro reward. Understanding that the chaos had structure, however twisted. One light darted across a fallen log. I lunged after it, heart pounding. It vanished mid-step. My hand touched cold air, and for a heartbeat, I thought I felt the brush of something else, soft, warm, and fleeting. Open loop, what brushed past me? Phantom or real? We kept moving, fog pressing from all sides, swallowing sound. Every now and then, the beam caught glimpses of shapes tall, thin, shifting at angles that made no sense. Pattern interrupt. Geometry breaking, perception faltering. A sudden, sharp reflection off a puddle caught my eye. The light wasn't coming from above. It was inside the water, glowing faintly, like embers. Micro reward, a moment of visual clarity, even if unsettling. I paused, listening. The lights weren't making noise, but the fog vibrated faintly, like air had substance. Johnson whispered again, fear thick in his voice. This isn't right. Open loop. Why did the forest feel like it was breathing? The beam swung to the right, catching something half buried in moss. I stepped closer, just a shape, almost human, curled and unmoving. Pattern interrupt. Uncertainty. Was it a corpse, a mannequin, or a trick of the fog? We moved past it, hearts thudding. The lights reappeared ahead, flickering in tandem now, leading us deeper. Each step became slower, heavier, like the fog itself resisted our movement. Micro reward, confirmation that we were being guided, intentionally or not. Something twitched in the corner of my eye. I spun, flashlight slicing the fog. Nothing. Then, in the next second, the lights vanished again. Open loop. Were we being watched, or were we the watchers? The forest opened briefly into a clearing. The lights hovered midair, forming a circle. I stepped closer, adrenaline surging. The circle shimmered, almost like it was vibrating, pulsating. Pattern interrupt. Visual structure rising from chaos, teasing comprehension. Johnson stumbled over a root. I reached for him, but the lights flickered away. Micro reward. A tense beat, a reminder that even small relief could be fleeting. I pressed forward alone, flashlight scanning. Shadows bent at impossible angles. Every step seemed to take longer. Open loop. Was the clearing expanding, or were we shrinking? Then a soft whisper floated through the fog, just audible, mimicking our own voices. I froze. Pattern interrupt. Auditory hallucination or manipulation by some unseen force. The lights coalesced into something resembling a figure, though indistinct, shivering at the edges. Micro reward. A hint of recognition. Something approaching human form, though still alien. I swung the beam closer. The ground beneath the figure rippled, like liquid glass. Johnson grabbed my arm, pulling me back. Open loop. What was tethered to the ground and why? We skirted the figure, careful not to touch, careful not to break the pattern of lights. Each pulse seemed to synchronize with our heartbeats. Pattern interrupt. Perception merging with physiology, disorienting. Ahead, a faint glimmer suggested a path out. I hesitated. Did we leave the forest, or were we being funneled further in? Micro reward. The sense of potential escape, tenuous but real. The figure moved as we did, mimicking without detail, maintaining distance. Open loop. Was it sentient tracking us, or a shadow of the forest itself? The fog thickened once more. Every familiar shape warped. We slowed, trying to keep bearings. Pattern interrupt. Repeated uncertainty, reinforcing disorientation. Suddenly, the lights vanished entirely, leaving only fog and the echo of our own breathing. Micro reward. The tension peaked, then paused, letting fear settle fully before the next wave. I realized then that the forest didn't want us to see, only to follow. Every step, every beam of light was a challenge, a test, or maybe a trap. Open loop. Could we ever leave knowing what was guiding us? Johnson's voice cracked through the silence, faint, distant, and yet so near. I don't think we're alone. Pattern interrupt. Reminder that the human element was still fragile, vulnerable. The clearing shimmered again. Lights flickered faintly, teasing a path we weren't sure we wanted to follow. Micro reward. Curiosity reasserted, drawing us forward despite fear. I took a deep breath. The forest seemed to lean in around us, listening, waiting. Every instinct screamed to retreat. Yet every step we took was compelled. Open loop. What awaited at the end of the lights? And could we survive what came next? Even as we moved cautiously toward the edge of visibility, the figure, or whatever it was, remained patient, distant, yet undeniably present. Pattern interrupt. Presence without engagement. Sustaining tension. The fog shifted again, curling like smoke. The lights appeared one last time, hovering just ahead, then flickering and disappearing entirely. Micro reward. A fleeting glimpse, enough to suggest continuation, but with no resolution. The forest was silent now, save for our own cautious breathing. I knew instinctively we hadn't left. The path forward was uncertain, the lights gone, but their influence lingered, tugging at our perception, our senses, our minds. And in the shadows, between the shifting trees, I could still feel it watching, waiting, deliberate. I stepped out of the trees, or at least I thought I did. The edge of the forest should have been obvious, lighter sky, cleaner air, but it wasn't. Fog lingered in the hollows, curling between the trunks like smoke that refused to die. My boots were caked with mud, but the ground felt too soft, as if it remembered every step we'd ever taken. Open loop. Did the forest actually end, or was it following us? Johnson muttered something about seeing the road ahead. I squinted. There was a narrow ribbon of asphalt, slick with early morning dew. Relief washed over me, but only briefly. The trees pressed close on either side, their shadows stretching into the road, reaching for us. Pattern interrupt. Safety tainted by proximity. Fear sliding back in. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing moved, but the sensation was there again. The weight of eyes in the branches, faint but deliberate. I shook my head, telling myself it was paranoia. Micro reward. Acknowledgement of human instinct still active, even amid dread. The voices started again, soft and fragmented, echoing from the tree lean. Not words, not full sentences, just whispers that mimic laughter, sighs, and sometimes our own voices. Open loop. Whose voices were these? Memory, forest, or something else entirely? Johnson stumbled, cursing under his breath, and I reached to steady him. His hand trembled more than mine. We both knew it wasn't just a chase, the fog, the uneven ground. There was a lingering presence behind us. Pattern interrupt. Psychological escalation, using physical reaction. The road curved slightly, and I thought I saw a movement between the trees, a flicker of black against the gray mist. It vanished when I focused, leaving only the whispering. Micro reward. Confirmation that something or someone was still there. I tried to focus on the sound of our boots on the asphalt, counting each step, grounding myself. But even that rhythm was interrupted by faint echoes that didn't match our movement. Open loop. How long had it been following? Was it ever gone off? The tree lean thinned, revealing a small clearing ahead. The fog lifted enough to see the remnants of the forest floor. Broken branches, leaves pressed flat, footprints we hadn't left. Pattern interrupt. Evidence of movement, not our own, escalating unease. Johnson stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I did. A low hum, almost like a chant, vibrating through the air. Not loud, not close, yet it penetrated every nerve. Micro reward. A sensory cue drawing attention, subtle but immersive. I picked up the pace, dragging him along. The asphalt felt safer, firmer beneath us, but the sensation of being watched intensified. Every tree seemed to lean toward the road, shadows bending unnaturally. Open loop. Were we being funneled, herded, or hunted? The whispers began layering, overlapping, sometimes echoing our own words from minutes before. "Keep moving, don't look back," they said. Or maybe I imagined it. Pattern interrupt. Auditory distortion, keeping the mind off balance. I dared to glance behind. Shapes shimmer between the trees, thin and inconstant, like smoke caught in a current. Each time I blinked, they shifted closer, or maybe the road curved beneath them. Micro reward. Visual confirmation of continued presence, subtle escalation. We reached a small bridge, wooden planks slick with dew. Crossing it should have been relief, a sign we were leaving the forest behind. But the fog pool below, moving as if alive, whispering through the slats. Open loop. Did the ground itself remember us? I heard a snap like a branch breaking, but it wasn't beneath our feet. My flashlight caught nothing. Only fog curling in unnatural patterns. Pattern interrupt. Tension spiked, reinforcing that threat is unseen but present. The road opened onto clearer terrain. Pastures, maybe even farmland, but the whispers didn't fade. They rode the wind, light as breath, teasing memories, teasing fear. Micro reward. Partial relief. Showing distance travel but not full escape. I slowed, trying to map our surroundings. The forest behind us looked denser than before, and I could swear I saw new shapes among the trees. Open loop. Had the forest grown while we weren't looking, or had we merely imagined leaving? Johnson's voice broke through the fog, taut with fear. I don't think we're alone. The words were simple, but the weight behind them pulled tight at my chest. Pattern interrupt. Human acknowledgement of danger, renewing emotional stakes. The road twisted slightly, and shadows lengthened unnaturally, merging with the tree lean. I realized then that the forest memory wasn't just the trees. It was everything it touched, every step we'd taken, echoing in whispers and shapes. Micro reward. Insight into the forest's lingering presence. I forced myself to keep moving, counting steps again, telling myself the sun was rising. The world would make sense soon. But with every step, the voices layered tighter, the eyes and the shadows more insistent. Open loop. Could any measure of distance sever the forest hold? A sudden movement caught my peripheral vision. A figure, indistinct, standing at the tree lean. It didn't approach, didn't retreat, simply watched. Pattern interrupt. Visual reminder of unresolved threat. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice caught. Johnson's hand squeezed mine, grounding me, anchoring me in what little reality we had left. Micro reward, emotional tethering, small comfort in chaos. The whisper's shifted tone, almost mocking, almost familiar. You left, but we remember. The words weren't directed at us, or were they? Open loop. Was the forest sentient or our minds fracturing? I scanned the horizon. Signs of civilization. Fences, distant rooftops. Yet the forest's influence lingered in every shadow, every fog curl. The woods remembered us. And the memory was patient, deliberate, unrelenting. Pattern interrupt. Psychological escalation through environmental cues. We stepped fully onto a paved road. The asphalt felt real, solid, tangible. Relief should have followed. But the whispering persisted, a ghostly reminder that escape was never complete. Micro reward, partial closure, tension modulated but unresolved. I glanced back one last time. The tree lean seemed to pulse with faint movement, shadows bending, light shifting. The voices faded, but not entirely. An echo, a promise, a lingering thought. Open loop. What had followed us, and what would wait the next time we returned. Johnson exhaled weary, but his eyes mirrored mine. The understanding that we had left, yes, but the forest had not released us. Its memory stretched beyond the trees, and in that memory we were still present. We moved forward, road beneath us steady, footsteps echoing. The fog lifted slightly, revealing fields bathed in soft dawn. Partial closure. We were out, but the unseen presence remained just beyond perception, and the voices would never fully leave. The moment I turned the key in the cruiser, I felt it, the way the night pressed close, heavy and quiet. The dashboard lights glowed weakly, flickering as if uncertain. Then the radio cut in, a low static that pulsed with the engine, like it had a heartbeat of its own. I twisted the dial, expecting the usual chatter, but instead it was garbled voices, overlapping, indecipherable. Open loop. Who, or what, was trying to speak? I reached over, fiddling with the knobs. The voices shifted, rising and falling, sometimes sounding almost human, then cracking into noise that made my teeth ache. Johnson leaned over, squinting at me. "You hear that?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. Pattern interrupt. Immediate escalation through auditory distortion. The call had been routine. Some suspicious vehicle reported on the edge of town. But that routine felt suspended, hollow. The static wasn't random. It paused as if listening, then surged when we tried to respond. Micro reward. Recognition that the radio itself was active, almost sentient. A familiar voice whispered my name, just at the edge of comprehension. I jerked, scanning the empty streets, the cruiser lights cutting through foggy stretches. Open loop. Was it Johnson, someone from the call, or something else entirely? The static twisted, weaving in half sentences. "Don't leave you alone." I slammed the dial down, heart racing. The words weren't coming from anyone nearby. I was certain of it. Pattern interrupt. Auditory threat reinforces psychological dread. I tried to focus on the road. The streetlights flickered over abandoned storefronts, but nothing moved. Yet the feeling of eyes in the darkness refused to leave. Micro reward. Physical anchoring, giving the mind a moment to assess surroundings. Johnson muttered something about frequency interference. I knew he meant the technical side, but the tension in his voice betrayed it. He felt it too. Open loop. Was this just a malfunction, or something deliberately communicating? Static surged again, louder, almost urgent. Among the noise, a phrase stood out, chilling in its clarity. "Turn back now." I glanced at Johnson. He paled. Pattern interrupt. Clear, comprehensible warning amid chaos. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. The call still hadn't come in over the radio. Nothing else was on the line. Just us, the night, and whatever had found the frequency. Micro reward, affirmation of isolation, heightening tension. We rolled past the intersection near the old mill. The radio hummed, then a whisper, soft but clear. I see you. Open loop. Who was watching? Was it outside, inside, or something in between? I flicked the scanner, trying to tune channels, but each one bled the same static-laden, fractured voices. The words were fragments of old conversations, snippets that shouldn't be here, pattern interrupt, auditory distortion layered with memory fragments. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The road curved unnaturally, or maybe my perception shifted. The static responded, rising when we slowed, quieting when we sped up. Micro reward, small insight. Our actions seemed to influence it. A sharp crack came through the speakers, like a gunshot. Though the streets remained silent, I froze, sweat prickling my neck. Johnson's hand rested on my shoulder. Open loop. Was this warning, attack, or hallucination? We reached the outskirts of town. The radio settled into low hums, but the whispers lingered, faint, echoing in cadence with my heartbeat. Pattern interrupt, partial relief, followed by lingering threat. I tried to remember the last time a call felt this wrong. It wasn't the streets, it wasn't the fog. It was the radio, the voices, carrying a sense that the night was aware of us. Micro reward, emotional insight, connecting physical and psychological tension. Static flare again, then one last phrase. You can't leave. The words sliced through the cabin, leaving silence that felt heavier than any noise. Open loop. Was this just a radio, or the first sign of something following us? The night stretched on. The streets were empty. Lights passed by, faint echoes of normalcy. But the weight of the voices clung. Johnson's glance said what neither of us could voice. This call was never routine. Pattern interrupt. Relational cue to deepen immersion. We rolled through familiar roads, yet everything fell off. Shadows lengthened where there should be none. The radio crackled. The hum of static and undercurrent beneath my own pulse. Micro reward, minor sensory payoff, keeping attention tethered. I realized the voices were not random. They were fragments, patterns repeating, as if memorizing our route. Open loop. Were we being recorded, studied, or lured? We approached the call location. The old parking lot near the industrial park. The cruiser lights cut through mist curling along the asphalt. The radio whispered low, unintelligible, but I caught a word unmistakable. Welcome, pattern interrupt. Arrival at location matched with subtle narrative escalation. Johnson's eyes met mine. Do you feel it? He asked. I nodded. The static wasn't just sound. It was presence. It pulsed with awareness, with patience. Micro reward, emotional acknowledgement reinforcing shared fear. I killed the engine. Silence was supposed to follow, but the hum lingered, a vibration through the dashboard, the floor, through us. Open loop. What entity, human or otherwise, could occupy sound this way? I turned the radio off. The silence was deeper than noise had ever been. But still, when I breathed, I thought I heard fragments of words, faint as a shadow brushing past. Pattern interrupt. Brief calm, undermined by residual tension. We stepped out of the cruiser. Fog curled around the parking lot, swallowing headlights, folding light back on itself. The static returned, faintly, almost as if mocking our courage. Micro reward, tactile visualization grounding fear in environment. I scanned the lot. Empty cars, cracked asphalt, broken streetlights, but the voices threaded through it all. They weren't attached to the world. They were in the air, in the night, in the pulse of the fog. Open loop. Could they exist independently, or were we hearing what should never be audible? Johnson swallowed hard, glancing toward the tree line. We should check it, he whispered. My heart thudded, caught between duty and instinct. Pattern interrupt. Internal conflict escalating stakes. I raised the flashlight. Its beam cut through fog, illuminating nothing but wet asphalt and the occasional glint of trash. The static pulsed in a fragment, distinct, closer. Micro reward. Small reveal, intensifying tension while giving narrative payoff. Every shadow seemed to twitch in response to our movement. The fog warped around shapes that disappeared when looked at directly. Open loop. Were these hallucinations shadows or something else? The night seemed to stretch, thickening around us. Every step echoed, but the echoes were joined by faint whispers of footsteps that weren't ours. Pattern interrupt, sensory layering to unsettled perception. I realized we had arrived at the scene, but it had changed. The parking lot didn't match memory. Lines shifted. Patches of asphalt seemed deeper, darker. Micro reward, subtle environmental clue, increasing disorientation. Static rose one last time, a crescendo, then fractured into laughter, breath, whispers. One voice, clear and slow, not alone. Open loop. Who else or what else was present unseen? Johnson. And I shared a look that said everything. The call was routine, but the radio had rewritten it, layered it with something older, patient, watching. Pattern interrupt, narrative escalation, bringing threat to emotional foreground. We stepped back into the cruiser, doors locking behind us. The static hummed, lower now, as if considering us. Micro reward, partial reprieve, with lingering uncertainty. I started the engine, hands trembling. The night outside hadn't changed, but inside the cabin, we knew. Routine was gone and some fragment of the night had entered with us. Open loop. What followed us from that radio, and how long before it found its way fully into our world? We drove off, headlights cutting through fog and memory. The static whispered one final fragment, fading. You'll hear me again, partial closure. Immediate threat withdrawn, but promise of return left unanswered. The first time I saw it, my stomach dropped. A house, standing alone, backlit by the faint glow of the streetlights, in a place I knew well, or thought I did. The map on the dashboard said it shouldn't be there. The GPS blinked at me, confused. I blinked back. Pattern interrupt. The impossible becomes real. Johnson squinted to the fog, muttering, "That's not supposed to be here." The building's edges shimmered, almost like heat haze, but it wasn't heat. The paint looked fresh, untouched, though I knew the area had been abandoned for years. Micro reward, subtle visual oddity, gives first clue something is wrong. As we drove closer, I saw the front door, or thought I did. By the time the cruiser stopped, it had disappeared. The facade was solid, unbroken. My heartbeat thumped loud enough to echo in the cabin. Open loop. Why would a house appear and then vanish? I grabbed the flashlight, Johnson beside me. Fog coiled around the tires, spilling onto the cracked asphalt. The houses seemed to stretch, elongate, as if watching us approach. Micro reward. Minor environmental shift reinforces unease. I stepped out first. The asphalt crunched underfoot. The first house loomed silent, yet it radiated intent. The radio crackled faintly, static whispering fragments I couldn't understand. Open loop. Was the sound tied to the building or the woods behind it? I reached for the doorframe, expecting cold wood, paint, maybe rot, but my fingers meant nothing. Solid wall. Johnson whispered my name, his voice taut with disbelief. Pattern interrupt. Tactile expectations shattered, escalating tension. We move around the block. Every side offer the same. Windows like eyes, walls unbroken, doors erased. Even familiar landmarks, lampposts, curbs, shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Micro reward. Recognition of subtle disorientation gives the mind a small victory. A faint light flickered inside one house. Not through windows, there were none, but through the walls themselves, as if the structure breathed. I crouched, trying to focus. Shadows inside twisted unnaturally. Open loop. What or who was inside? Johnson's breath misted in the cold air. Maybe someone's playing a prank, he offered, but his voice betrayed the doubt. I shook my head. This wasn't prank territory. This was something else entirely. Pattern interrupt. Internal conflict adds realism, heightens tension. The building seemed to shift again. The house we had first seen, the one that disappeared, was now 3 houses down, closer than it should have been. Micro reward. Small reveal, evidence the world itself was unreliable. I lifted the flashlight toward a second house. The beam caught edges of a window, or what might have been one, but it distorted as I watched. Corners bent inward, angles impossible. My stomach churned. Open loop. Was it a trick of the light, or the house itself changing? We advanced carefully, footsteps muted by fog. Each step seemed louder in my ears. Each breath echoed back as if from another world. The first house loomed beside us suddenly, impossibly close. The light inside pulsing like a heartbeat. Pattern interrupt. Spatial distortion escalates dread. I leaned closer, trying to see inside. A figure, or maybe just a shadow, shifted, but there was no window to see through. Micro reward. Brief visual cue feeds curiosity. Do you see that? Johnson hissed. I did, or I thought I did. The shadow moved with intent, then froze, then disappeared entirely as I blinked. Open loop. Is this real or a projection of our fear? I circled the house. The front remained blank. I touched the wall, shivering at the solidity. Behind us, a faint sound, like a door creaking far away, echoed, but there was no door. Pattern interrupt. Auditory cue layered on visual impossibility. The fog thickened. The cruiser's lights barely penetrated it. Buildings that should have been empty lots now loomed like silent sentinels. Micro reward. Brief sensory detail. Gives the audience grounding. I tried to call dispatch, hands trembling, but the radio hummed only static, low and patient. Open loop. Is this isolation technical or intentional? A window flickered again, on a wall that had none moments before. Shapes moved inside, quick and angular. Johnson grabbed my arm. We shouldn't. His words cut off as the house seemed to breathe, expanding, subtly contracting. Pattern interrupt. Environment becomes active participant. I realized the buildings were not fixed. They existed in layers or moments or memories I wasn't meant to access. Each attempt to approach warped them further. Micro reward. Insight into the unnatural nature of the houses. We tried to backtrack. The street we had driven down was wrong now. Houses crowded the road, endless, doors swallowed, windows bending. Open loop. Was the world itself folding around us? The fog swirled, catching streetlight glints like eyes. I caught glimpses of movement, figures standing still, then gone when looked at directly. Pattern interrupt. Minor hallucination enhances uncertainty. Johnson's voice trembled. Maybe we should leave. I agreed, but the route back was gone, replaced by more buildings, all unapproachable, all impossible. Micro reward. Brief emotional validation shared between characters. I held the flashlight high. The beam caught something on a wall. A door etched into the siding, faint, unreal. When I stepped closer, it vanished. Open loop. Could we access the impossible, or were we trapped outside comprehension? Static whispered across the radio again, just enough to make us flinch. Snippets of voices, low and distant. You shouldn't be here. Pattern interrupt. Auditory escalation layered with visual impossibility. We moved together, edge of fear propelling us forward. A house to our right shifted as we passed, doors appearing and vanishing in sequence. Windows pulsing with dim, impossible light. Micro reward. Repeated small reveals, reinforcing the surreal environment. I tried to focus on shapes, edges, landmarks, anything consistent, but there was nothing. The world bent around us, responsive, almost aware. Open loop. Was this consciousness trap or madness? A shadow detached from a wall, stretching unnaturally across the street. I froze. It had form, movement, yet no substance. Johnson grabbed my arm. Pattern interrupt. Physical threat implied. Tension spikes. We tried retracing our steps. Every path led to more houses, doors swallowing themselves, windows folding inward. Micro reward. Recognition of failed attempts, deepening dread. I thought I saw a familiar street. Ours, but angles were wrong. Buildings too close, doors erased. The fog wrapped tighter. Static hummed low, like breathing, patient, omnipresent. Open loop. Had we ever left the area we knew? Johnson whispered that we might be trapped in some echo of the town, or a memory that had become real. I didn't answer. I couldn't think clearly enough. Pattern interrupt. Psychological shift into internalized fear. We pressed on, flashlight beams cutting through fog. The houses moved subtly, walls bending, angles shifting, doors vanishing the moment we reached for them. Micro reward. Continuous visual oddity sustains engagement. I glimpsed the door ahead, tall, thin, faintly glowing. My pulse quickened. When I stepped forward, it was gone. Open loop. Is access possible or a lure? We slowed. Every sense strained. The smell of wet paint, the chill on our skin, the sound of impossible movement just beyond light. Pattern interrupt. Multi-sensory tension escalation. The houses were endless now. Stretching, folding, a labyrinth with no entry. Static whispered fragments, voices overlapping. Leave, stay, we see. Micro reward. Partial comprehension. Feeding curiosity. I realized the world we knew had slipped away. Each step only deepened the maze. Open loop. Were we still in our town or somewhere else entirely? We paused, backs to each other, flashlights sweeping, trying to find bearings. Shapes shifted, doors vanished and reappeared behind us. Light bending impossibly. Pattern interrupt. Environment reacts unpredictably, maintaining suspense. Johnson swallowed, voice low. We can't leave. Not yet. I nodded, feeling it. The houses were alive in some way, responding, remembering us, learning. Micro reward. Minor revelation on environmental intelligence. The night thickened. Each building pulsed faintly. A heartbeat of impossible architecture. I realized the ordinary world had dissolved, leaving us in a place where rules bent, doors hid, and nothing could be trusted. Open loop. Would we escape or become part of this impossibility? We moved slowly, methodical, yet every step altered the landscape. Doors vanished the moment we tried them. Windows rippled like water. Walls shimmered. Pattern interrupt. Constant visual change sustains attention. Finally, a faint break in the fog. A street that resembled our world. Partially familiar, though warped. I clung to it, desperate. Micro reward. Brief relief, anchored to reality. But the whisper of static lingered, low, patient. Promising the houses had not forgotten, had not released us. Open loop. The threat remains unresolved. Anticipation for next chapter. We stepped toward what might be exit. Flashlights slicing fog. Hearts hammering. The town, or its echo, watched, shifted and waited. Pattern interrupt. Final tension spike, leaving lingering dread that I noticed at first in the rear-view mirror. A flicker, just at the edge of the glass, like a shadow stretching across the back seat where nothing should be. My pulse jumped, the hairs on my neck stiffening. The cruiser's headlights cut through the fog, illuminating nothing, but I knew I'd seen movement. Pattern interrupt. The familiar becomes unreliable. Johnson shifted beside me, muttering about tired eyes, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every mirror reflected something else. A flash of someone standing behind us, then gone when I blinked. Open loop. What is watching and why only reflections? I slowed the vehicle, scanning the road ahead. The houses we passed seemed normal enough, but their windows betrayed secrets. Shadows moved inside, but the street was empty, the yards abandoned. Micro reward. Audience gets a subtle clue about the creeping threat. The rear view flickered again, and this time a face lingered just for a heartbeat. Pale, featureless, staring. My hand gripped the wheel tighter. Johnson leaned over. Did you see that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Pattern interrupt. First concrete visual escalation. I tried to reason it out. Fog, reflections trickle the dim light, but then the side mirror caught another, different shadow. Taller, slower, observing. My stomach churned. Open loop. Is there more than one entity, or is this a single presence shifting forms? We stopped at the intersection. Headlights swept across empty streets, but the mirrors told another story. Movement behind us, flickering impossible angles. Micro reward. Repeated small revelation reinforces a surreal environment. I stepped out, flashlight drawn, fog curling around my boots. The mirrors on the cruiser reflected more than the empty street. Figures, thin and pale, leaned close as if pressing through glass that didn't exist. Pattern interrupt. Tactile expectations shattered. Tension rises. Johnson hesitated, staring at his own reflection. I watched it twist unnaturally. His face elongated, his features blurred, then snapped back as he moved. I swallowed hard. Open loop. Are the reflections sentient or hallucinations triggered by fear? I circled the cruiser slowly. Every mirror showed the same anomaly. Figures that weren't there physically. Windows that didn't exist in the real world. Micro reward. Visual confirmation of impossible phenomenon. Static whispered on the radio, just faint enough to make my ears ache. Snippets of voices, garbled, overlapping. Look, watch behind. Pattern interrupt. Auditory layer adds psychological tension. I leaned closer to the rear view. The shadow paused, watching, mimicking my movements, but it wasn't me. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, burned emptily. Open loop. Was this something human or entirely different? Johnson tugged at my sleeve. We can't stay here, he said, voice tight. But leaving didn't feel safe either. The reflection shifted even as we moved, angling toward us like the world itself was bending. Micro reward, emotional validation shared between characters. We returned to the cruiser, but the mirrors showed new angles, impossible perspectives. Streets behind us multiplied, stretching endlessly, populated with the pale shapes we hadn't noticed before. Pattern interrupt. Spatial distortion heightens tension. I reached for the door handle. My reflection didn't move with me. It stayed still watching. Static on the radio rose, a low hum vibrating through the metal of the vehicle. Open loop. Is the anomaly limited to reflections or spilling into reality? A side window caught my eye. The fog beyond rippled as it breathed upon. Shadows passed behind it. Figures running, bending, merging. I squinted, unsure what was solid and what wasn't. Micro reward. Subtle movement maintains engagement. I realized the rear view wasn't just reflecting. It was showing possibilities, echoes, memories twisted. My pulse thudded painfully. Johnson's eyes darted to his own reflection, now completely still, featureless. Pattern interrupt. Psychological tension escalates. I tried talking aloud, reasoning. Maybe the town is playing tricks. Maybe it's fatigued. But even my own words sounded hollow against the hum of static and the flicker of shadows. Open loop. Is this mental or external? The fog thickened, curling over the cruiser, wrapping mirrors in mist. Every time I glanced back, the figures grew more distinct, sharper, closer. Micro reward. Small, repeated escalation reinforces dread. We started driving again. Every street, every turn reflected new horrors. Windows appeared where there were none. Shadows leaned, twisted, stared. The radio hummed voices we couldn't understand. Pattern interrupt. Cumulative sensory assault keeps tension high. I caught a fleeting movement in the rear view, a hand reaching through the glass, almost touching the windshield. My breath caught. Johnson didn't see it. He only saw his own reflection, safe, normal. Open loop. Are these entities selective, or is our perception fractured? We slowed near a familiar corner, hoping to ground ourselves. But the mirrors told a different story. The world behind us had multiplied, layered over itself. Figures pressed closer, their forms bending unnaturally, merging with reflections of trees, houses, empty streets. Micro reward. Partial understanding of environmental anomaly. Static rose higher, then collapsed into silence. The figures lingered. I realized the reflections remembered us, noted our fear. Pattern interrupt. Psychological insight into entities add stakes. I stepped out, flashlight sweeping. The mirrors reflected not just our forms, but our intentions. Every shadow, every figure, responded. Open loop. Can the reflection's awareness trap us or guide us? Johnson whispered, voice trembling, we should leave. But the route we came from was gone. Street corners bent, mirrors multiplying, shadows stretching impossibly. Micro reward. Brief emotional clarity shared between characters. We moved cautiously, flashlight beams cutting through fog. Each mirror, each reflective surface, showed a different story. Some normal, some horrifying, all watching. Pattern interrupt. Visual storytelling sustains attention. I realized that leaving the area might not matter. The reflections were everywhere, tracking, echoing, anticipating. Open loop. Are we still in the real world or somewhere entirely mirrored? We pressed on, circling blocks, trying to find something consistent. Nothing repeated as expected. Every turn revealed new angles, windows appearing, figures shifting. Micro reward, repeated small escalation. I caught sight of myself in the rear view, but my reflection moved independently. It lifted its head, looked directly at me, and smiled. I froze. Pattern interrupt. Final psychological escalation, pure unease. The radio whispered again. You cannot leave. Static swallowed it before I could respond. My pulse slammed. Johnson's hand gripped mine. Open loop. Threat unresolved. Anticipation for next chapter. We finally approached a street that seemed normal, straight, familiar. Relief flickered, brief, fragile. Micro reward. Temporary anchor amid chaos. But the reflections didn't stop. Figures lingered in every surface we passed, whispering silently, watching, waiting. Pattern interrupt. Lingering threat sustains dread. I glanced in the rear view one last time before turning away. Pale shapes pressed against non-existent glass, bending impossibly, observing. Static hummed low. The world felt wrong, warped. Open loop. What we saw would follow us, unseen, remembered. We drove on, headlights slicing fog, hearts hammering, mirrors alive behind us. And I knew the reflections would never stop. I gripped the wheel tighter, fog curling around the cruiser like smoke, blurring the edges of the road. Even with headlights cutting through the mist, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was clinging to us. Something from the woods, or from the mirrors themselves. Johnson was quiet beside me, shoulders tense, eyes flicking to the side mirrors more than the road. I tried to laugh it off, said it was just a fog, just our imagination, but the shadows in those mirrors had been too precise to dismiss. As we moved forward, the rear view reflected more than the empty road behind. Pale shapes pressed against the glass, bending around corners that didn't exist. I blinked, but they didn't vanish. The fog made the world outside ghostly, but the reflections were solid, deliberate. Open loop. Why did they linger, even as the real forest fell behind us? I could feel my pulse thundering my ears. Each mile we drove, the streets became strangely familiar, yet subtly wrong. A mailbox here, a street lamp there, but always twisted slightly, angles just off. Micro reward. Audience senses the subtle alteration of reality. Johnson finally broke the silence. Do you see them? His voice was tight, barely a whisper. I didn't answer at first, afraid that acknowledging it might make it real. But I couldn't deny the figures in the mirrors. Thin, pale, their heads cocked unnaturally as if studying us. Pattern interrupt. Tension escalates, shifting perspective to shared terror. I tried focusing on the road, counting the lines, listening to the hum of the engine. Yet every time I glanced at the side mirror, the figures were closer, leaning, watching, not moving with the car, but remaining fixed in the reflective surfaces. Open loop. Are they bound to mirrors or to us? A flash of movement to the left caught my eye. A figure standing in a front window that should have been empty, no house even there in daylight. I jerked the wheel slightly, heart hammering. Micro reward. Audience gets a small, concrete scare that builds context. The radio crackled, static whispering in fragments. Do not leave. I shook my head. The sound should have been meaningless, just interference, but it mimicked what we were seeing. The figures in the mirrors seemed to respond, tilting their heads toward the sound. Pattern interrupt. Auditory cue mirrors visual horror, escalating tension. We drove on, streets repeating like a bad dream. Each reflection seemed to anticipate us. Figures leaning closer, stretching, blending into other surfaces. Windows we passed flickered with movement, even when there were no homes there. Open loop. Is the anomaly expanding or are we trapped in it? I tried talking aloud, reasoning. It's just reflections, just shadows. But the shapes in the mirrors weren't random. They were deliberate, following, adjusting, observing. Johnson swallowed audibly, glancing nervously at his side mirror. Micro reward. Shared fear emphasizes character realism. I passed a curve, and the rear view caught a full-length figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. Nothing was there. The fog shifted like liquid, swallowing the empty road. Pattern interrupt. Physical world seems to mimic reflections. Tension spikes. Our headlights swept past trees, but every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, even a polished hood, held forms. They pressed against surfaces that weren't solid, merging with their own distorted reflections. Open loop. Are these entities bound by reflection or by perception? Johnson reached for the door handle, as if leaving the car might help. I grabbed his arm. We can't stop. Not yet. Every second outside, increased exposure. Micro reward. Immediate survival stakes reinforce engagement. The radio crackled again, whispers overlapping with static. Watch, remember, follow. I shivered, realizing the echoes weren't just in the mirrors. They were in my mind. Pattern interrupt. Psychological escalation deepens tension. As the miles stretched, the reflections multiplied. Every turn, every passing window, held echoes of us. Figures leaning, staring, shifting. I felt the same tight grip on the wheel that had started at the forest's edge, but now it was inescapable. Open loop. Will leaving the forest ever free us? Were the echoes permanent? I caught a glimpse in the rear view of something different. My own reflection smiling wide wrong. I jerked my head to Johnson. His reflection remained normal calm, but the figures around him bent slightly, tilting toward mine. Micro reward. Subtle insight into entity behavior keeps tension layered. We drove through familiar streets that had grown alien. Trees arched unnaturally. Shadows lengthened, and windows reflected what shouldn't exist. Pattern interrupt. The ordinary becomes unfamiliar. Psychological dread rises. The radio fell silent, leaving only the hum of the engine. And yet, I could feel them, pressing, watching, moving with us in every reflective surface. Open loop. Absence of sound doesn't mean absence of threat. I try to focus on headlights, lane markers, the end of the road ahead, but every mirror told a different story. Some reflections showed streets behind us that we hadn't driven. Others showed figures we had never seen. Micro reward. Consistent. Escalating surrealism maintains engagement. Johnson muttered. They're everywhere. I nodded, too tense to speak. Every reflective surface was alive, memorizing us, pressing in with their pale forms. Pattern interrupt. Shared realization validates fear for the audience. We passed a curve, and I glimpsed them in a shop window. Shadows, pale and wrong, pressed against glass. I blinked. They weren't there. Yet in the mirrors, they remained patient, unblinking. Open loop. Are we seeing them, or are they creating us in reflections? Time blurred. Streets stretched endlessly. Mirrors multiplied. I realized the echoes would follow us, mile after mile, reflection after reflection. Micro reward. Audience is reminded of persistent threat. I tried to make sense of it, thinking maybe the forest left a mark, maybe the reflections carried memory. The figures moved as if recalling everything, imprinting fear into us. Pattern interrupt. Psychological insight escalates stakes. The fog began to thin, headlights cutting through clearer streets. Relief flared, brief and fragile. But every mirror, every window, held the shape still. Watching, waiting, open loop. Even clarity cannot erase them. I glanced in the rear view. Pale shapes leaned, stretching, pressing against non-existent glass. The reflections of those we had passed now following. Static hummed low in my mind, though the radio was silent. Micro reward. Small, final visualization of persistent dread. We turned the corner toward town. Streetlights familiar, solid, real. I exhaled. For a moment, relief felt tangible, but mirrors reflected differently, showing figures bending, twisting, stalking. Even as the real world normalized, pattern interrupt. Threat lingers. Tension remains unresolved. Johnson reached over, gripping my arm. I looked at him, tried to smile. Our hands trembled. We drove on, headlights cutting through the night. And I knew the echoes of the forest, of the reflections, were not gone. They would follow, layer upon layer, forever. Somewhere in the mirrors, something remembered us. The engine cut out without warning. 1 second we were moving, the hum of the cruiser beneath us steady, and the next, nothing. Silence swallowed the road. I gripped the wheel tighter, Knuckles white, and tried the ignition again. Only a weak click answered. Johnson muttered something under his breath, probably swearing at the timing, but I didn't hear it fully. The night was unervingly quiet. No crickets, no wind through the trees, nothing except the faint hiss of our own breathing. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, scanning the asphalt that stretched ahead. The road was empty, the lines vanishing into darkness, and the edges blurred into shadows that didn't belong. Open loop. Why did it feel like the highway itself was watching? The cruiser's tail lights glowed dimly behind us, casting long, thin shadows into the fog that rolled in from nowhere. I thought I saw movement just at the corner of my eye. Something darted between the trees. Quick, too deliberate to be a deer. Micro reward. Small hint of unseen presence. Johnson was behind me, flashlight shaking, and I could hear his shallow breaths. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I did, but the movement wasn't consistent. 1 second, there, the next, nothing. The fog made the world uncertain. Edges smudged, reality soft. Pattern interrupt. Tension rises through uncertainty. I circled the cruiser, tapping the hood, the doors, trying to find any clue why it had died. Nothing. The engine block was cold. No smell of fuel, no signs of damage. Just dead. The highway stretched endlessly, a black ribbon under the moonless sky. Open loop. What caused it? Mechanical failure or something else? A faint light glimmered far down the road. At first, I thought it was another car. Then I realized it wasn't moving. It hovered, suspended in space like a candle flame, and flickered as though aware we were watching. Micro reward. Small visual anomaly sparks curiosity. I moved closer, each step echoing unnaturally on the asphalt. The light blinked again, then vanished. Johnson grabbed my arm. "We shouldn't," he didn't finish. The flashlight beam caught a figure standing off the road, half shrouded in mist. I jerked back. It wasn't human. Its shape bent wrong, limbs stretching at odd angles. Pattern interrupt. Sudden visual distortion escalates tension. The silence pressed against us, heavy and suffocating. No sound of tires, no engine, nothing from the trees except shadows that shifted when we weren't looking directly at them. Open loop. Were the shadows real or just tricks of our mind? I tried the ignition again, but only that weak click responded. Panic edged in. The thought of being stranded, alone, on this endless silent highway, pressed down like a weight on my chest. Micro reward. Emotional connection. Fear shared with character. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping. Not mechanical, not human. Something dragging or pacing. It came from the tree line, circling, circling. We froze, light scanning the edges, but the fog swallowed everything. Pattern interrupt. Auditory clue shifts focus, heightening tension. I felt a vibration underfoot, subtle, like the road itself was pulsing. My pulse matched it. Johnson's hand gripped mine. "What is that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. Nothing in training, nothing in experience prepared me for this. Open loop. What entity, what force caused a pulse? A faint scent reached us, metallic, coppery, sharp in the cool night air. I gagged. Johnson turned his face away. The fog seemed thicker now, curling around our legs, coiling, almost alive. Micro reward. Sensory detail deepens immersion. I scanned the horizon again. That light flickered back, hovering at the edge of visibility. Closer, further. It seemed to mock us, teasing, aware. I realized then that the figures in the shadows weren't entirely hidden. Open loop. What did they want? Were they watching or waiting? I stepped back toward the cruiser. The tail lights glowed again, dim red, and something moved inside the fog. I caught the glint of eyes. Not animal, not human, staring at us, reflecting the flashlight weakly. Pattern interrupt. Visual shift intensifies fear. We climbed back into the cruiser. Johnson tried the ignition. Still nothing. The lights of the dashboard flickered once. Weak, then died. The headlights faded, leaving us in near darkness. Micro reward. Immediate payoff. Character action followed by consequence. The highway stretched on, endless, oppressive. Every time I looked in the mirrors, I thought I saw movement behind us, But every glance revealed only fog, nothing solid. Open loop. Was the highway itself alive, or were we hallucinating? A soft scratching sound came from the roof. I froze, listening. It circled once, twice. Then silence. Johnson swallowed audibly. I could feel his tension radiating. Pattern interrupt. Unexpected sound breaks monotony, elevating suspense. I tried to rationalize. Maybe branches, maybe an animal. But something inside me, deep primal, knew better. Micro reward. Subtle internal realization gives audience a small anchor. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost its meaning. The light returned, not far now, flickering just beyond the tree lean. I squinted. Shapes moved within it, blurred, indefinite. Shadows bending, twisting. Open loop. Were they real, or an echo of the night itself? I thought about our training, the calls we responded to, the logic we relied on. None of it mattered now. Logic failed here. Survival meant responding to the unknown. Pattern interrupt. Perspective shift, introspective tension. Johnson whispered, "Maybe if we walk." I shook my head. Every instinct screamed to stay, to not step into the fog. The cruiser was dead. We were trapped. Micro reward. Audience shares moment of decision-making stress. The thumping returned, louder, synchronized with that pulsing from the road. We couldn't ignore it. I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the tree lean. Shadows recoiled, stretching away, yet we felt watch from every angle. Open loop. Was the entity singular or many? A sudden breeze carried whispering, almost intelligible. "Leave, leave." I shivered. Johnson's grip tightened. The fog shifted around the whispers, curling into shapes that seemed deliberate. Pattern interrupt. Auditory and visual cues combine, escalating psychological horror. I kicked the tires in frustration, pacing. No answer. The cruiser remained silent, inert, mocking. Micro reward. Physical action. Minor payoff for frustration. The flickering light blinked once more, then vanished into the night. My stomach dropped. Open loop. What had it been? Where had it gone? The road stretched endlessly, and I realized we weren't alone. The night wasn't empty. It was full but unseen. I could feel presence pressing against the periphery, surrounding, patient. Pattern interrupt. Lingering tension cements dread. We stayed inside, huddled, headlights fading to near black. Every shadow became a threat, every whisper promise. I understood then this night, this silence, had memory. It had patience, and it was watching us. Micro reward. Subtle insight into the threat. Hours passed in this way, time stretching thin. The engine would not turn over. The highway remained unnervingly silent. The fog coiled, the lights flickered, the shadows lingered. And through it all, the thumping, the whispers, the feeling of being observed never left. Open loop. What waits beyond the fog if we survive this night? By the time the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, we were exhausted, trembling, and no closer to understanding what had stopped us, what followed us, or what the night remembered. Pattern interrupt. Partial resolution. Yet tension persists. Somewhere in the fog, I knew the echoes of the highway remembered us, and whatever had paused our engine that night would not forget either. The road stretched endlessly, gray under the weak glow of the headlights. I noticed him before I even wanted to, just a shape on the shoulder, tall, still, and impossible to ignore. My gut tightened. He didn't move when I slowed the cruiser, didn't flinch when the high beams cut across him, just stood there. Breathing didn't sound right either, or maybe I didn't hear it at all. I tapped the brakes lightly. Johnson glanced over, frowning. "Do you see that?" His voice was quiet, but tense. I nodded, and the cruiser hummed over the asphalt like a fragile promise. Fragile because that figure wasn't supposed to be there. Open loop. Who was he, and why hadn't he moved when cars passed? The first instinct was to drive past, but the shoulder seemed to stretch unnaturally under his feet, widening the closer we got. It didn't feel real. The air around him thickened, humid, almost electric. A small reward. My senses prickling told me this wasn't ordinary. I slowed further. My reflection in the side mirror showed in the background, not quite aligned with the road. like he existed in a slightly different frame. Pattern interrupt. Visual twist escalates unease. Maybe it's just someone waiting for a ride? Johnson suggested, though his voice didn't sound convinced. I didn't answer. Rational explanations fell apart the second I noticed he wasn't holding anything. No bag, no movement, nothing human in gesture. Just presence. As we crept closer, headlights sweeping, I caught something in the fog, a shimmer around his shoulders, like heat off asphalt. Except it made no sense in a cold night. Micro reward. Small surreal detail. Curiosity deepens. I slowed to a crawl. His head turned. Not fully, but enough to catch the edge of something. His face, blurred in fog. Features wrong. Elongated in ways a human face couldn't be. My stomach churned. Open loop. What was this thing? The shoulder widened again, and I realized the cruiser's tires didn't seem to grip the asphalt as solidly anymore. The road warped slightly under us, like water rippling. Pattern interrupt. Environment changes subtly. Tension rises. Johnson muttered, "Maybe we should," but stopped. His eyes were glued to the figure. I could see the unease written across his face, matching my own. I gripped the wheel tighter. The thought of rolling past didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like stepping into something alive. He lifted a hand slowly, not waving, not signaling, but stretching toward us, finger stiff, unnatural. Micro reward. Slight action triggers immediate tension. I forced my voice out, shaky. "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer, only the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, low, indecipherable, curling around a cruiser, wrapping us in it. Open loop. What did the voice mean? I glanced in the rear view mirror. Nothing. Empty road. But the front? The side mirror. The figure stayed, unblinking, unyielding. Pattern interrupt. Perspective shift intensifies fear. The fog thickened. Headlights reflected off droplets in the air, creating halos around him that bent in ways light shouldn't. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, the shape was closer. Not moving, not walking, but closer somehow. Micro reward. Subtle visual shift maintained suspense. I tried rolling down the window. A cold hiss met me, sudden and biting, carrying the faint metallic scent of iron. I recoiled. Johnson didn't move. Neither did the figure. Open loop. Was he aware of us? Waiting for something? I tapped the horn lightly. More out of instinct than hope. Silence answered. The world didn't respond. Only him. Only that impossibly still shape standing in the fog. Pattern interrupt. Auditory cue fails. Tension spikes. The streetlights up ahead flickered once, twice. Then the one nearest us died, plunging half the road into darkness. My heart raced. The figure's edges softened, blurred, and I caught a glimpse of movement. Not a stride, but a ripple like heat distorting air. Micro reward. Small sensory anomaly confirmed something unnatural. I wanted to drive off, accelerate into the foggy road, but the shoulder constricted subtly, road edges vanishing. Not physically, but perceptually. Open loop. Was the road bending around him, or was our perception failing? I took a deep breath. We can't just sit here. I muttered, more to myself than Johnson. The figure didn't respond. A shiver ran down my spine. Even our radios felt muted, faint static only, like the night swallowed them. Pattern interrupt. Auditory environment reinforces isolation. I edged forward slowly. His hand raised higher, not threatening, just waiting. Johnson's flashlight flickered in my peripheral, catching something in the fog. A second shape, subtle, half visible, retreating behind a tree. Micro reward. New visual detail keeps curiosity engaged. My pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. That whatever this was, it didn't abide normal rules. I realized the figure wasn't human. Not in form, not in presence. Open loop, what was it? What did it want? The whispering came again, curling around the cruiser, faintly echoing in the mirrors. Go, leave! Not words I understood, but tones that made the blood in my veins chill. Pattern interrupt. Auditory horror escalates psychological tension. I looked straight at him, hands tightening on the wheel. Shadows stretched across the road unnaturally, merging with fog. bending around him like water around a stone. Micro reward. Visual depth sustains engagement. I tried the ignition again. The engine growled weak, coughing into life. But when headlights lit the shoulder, he was gone. Nothing. Just fog and empty asphalt. Open loop. Had he ever been there? Or had we been seeing something we couldn't comprehend? Johnson exhaled shakily. What the hell was that? His words hung in the air, unanswered. I didn't try to respond. There was no answer that would make sense. Nothing to rationalize. As we drove on, the road ahead seemed endless, folding under us like a ribbon of gray silk. My eyes darted constantly, mirrors, tree-line, fog, but the figure didn't reappear. Not yet. Pattern interrupt. Temporary relief. Tension held in anticipation. A chill followed us, lingering along the shoulders of the cruiser. I could feel it in my bones, in the vibration of the tires on asphalt. The whispering faded, but the sense of observation remained. Micro reward, emotional payoff, partial relief, lingering unease. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The fog thinned, but the road kept its grip on us, stretching and bending subtly. I kept looking for him, for the shoulder, for signs of that impossible presence. Open loop. Would he return, or was this just a warning? By the time the lights of town appeared faintly ahead, I realized my hands were shaking, heart still racing. The figure hadn't returned, but I could feel him in the spaces we'd left behind. Pattern interrupt. Partial resolution, lingering tension. Even as buildings came into view, even as asphalt became familiar, I knew the memory of the shoulder would follow me. The night had left its mark. And whatever stood there, unblinking, unapproachable, was still out there somewhere, watching the road we thought we knew. The headlights caught it first, a pair of lights flickering on the far side of the highway. At first, I thought it was just another car, lost, late, weaving into our lane. But something was off. The lights didn't move like a vehicle should. They lingered, hovering in the fog, then blinked out entirely. My stomach clenched. Johnson glanced over, frowning, voice low. Did that just disappear? I nodded, tight-lipped. Open loop. What was that? And why did it vanish? We slowed, inching forward. The asphalt was slick with mist, reflecting every beam like a mirror. The lights reappeared ahead, closer this time, and suddenly there was a shape. Not solid, not fully formed, edges blurring into fog. Micro reward, small visual detail, raises tension. I could see tires, maybe, but they didn't touch the ground properly, floating slightly. I honked once, sharp, hoping to provoke a reaction. Nothing, only that hum, low and vibrating, running through the cruiser's frame. The lights blinked again, right above the center line, and then vanished, leaving the road empty. Pattern interrupt. Disappearance escalates unease. Johnson muttered something about a drunk driver or a hallucination, but his eyes were wide, fixed. He knew, as I did, that this wasn't ordinary. The air smelled metallic, like wet iron or maybe blood. Micro reward. Sensory detail confirms danger without explanation. I edged the cruiser closer to the spot where the lights had been. Nothing. But then, from the rear view, I saw them again, closer now, impossibly close, chasing us silently. Open loop. How could they appear behind us if we hadn't passed them? I tried calling it in over the radio. Static, the faint scratch of garbled voices, but no words. Only that creeping tension that the night itself had swallowed the signal. Pattern interrupt. Auditory distortion heightens psychological dread. A new set of lights appeared on the shoulder. Not one, but two. And as we approached, one blinked out, then the other. Micro reward. Curiosity deepens, subtle twist. The road didn't behave normally anymore. Lines curved under the headlights like ribbons. I glanced at Johnson. He was gripping the dash, white-knuckled. His flashlight, when flicked on, caught nothing. No vehicle, no figure, nothing to explain the lights we were chasing. Perspective shift. Human perception question. Suddenly, a phantom car appeared directly in front of us. Headlights blinding. I slammed the brakes. The engine growled, tires screeching on wet asphalt. Then, just like before, it blinked away. Pattern interrupt. Sudden escalation shocks without traditional jump scare. The road ahead twisted. Shapes of other phantom vehicles appeared, then vanished. Light flares danced in impossible patterns, bouncing off fog that shouldn't be thick enough to distort them this way. Micro reward, small insight into surreal environment. Open loop. Were we entering some warped dimension of the highway? Johnson whispered. I can't. This isn't real. His words hung in the thick air. I wanted to argue, to rationalize, but rational thought felt heavy, like the fog itself pressed it out. The cruiser's own light seemed to flicker now, reflecting off shapes that weren't there. My reflection in the side mirror shifted unnaturally, stretched along the contours of the phantom vehicles. Pattern interrupt. Visual anomaly maintains engagement. I tried to accelerate. Every forward push met resistance. As if the asphalt had thickened, the road itself opposing us. Another phantom car appeared briefly in the rear view, close enough I could almost see the outline of its interior. But it was empty, or maybe not fully there. Micro reward, momentary clarity amid confusion. The air vibrated again. Faint whispers threaded around us, too low to understand, but present enough to make skin crawl. Open loop. Whose voice or what force did this belong to? We navigated the road in this suspended, impossible space. Lights appeared, vanished, shifted positions. Johnson's flashlight flickered on our dash, catching strange reflections in the fog. Shapes that bent around physics, trailing along the phantom vehicles like smoke. Pattern interrupt. Visual shift escalates tension. I gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse was loud, echoing in the quiet cabin. The horizon stretched endlessly. Every attempt to leave this nightmarish stretch of highway seemed futile. The lights always returned, rearranging themselves, mocking our motion. Micro reward, emotional payoff and shared dread with the character. Then a sudden lull. The fog thinned. Lights blinked out one by one. Relief threatened to settle, brief and shallow. Perspective shift. Temporary calm before escalation. But a new one appeared, directly in the lane ahead, headlights blinding, impossibly bright. The cruiser reacted instinctively, tires skidding slightly on the wet road. Open loop. Will we collide? Or is this another illusion? I caught a glimpse in the mirror. Johnson's reflection. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, but distorted, elongated unnaturally by the headlights of a phantom car behind us. Pattern interrupt. Subtle horror in familiar reflection. We drove, careful, silent, chasing clarity in a world that refused it. Lights appeared at odd angles, behind trees, floating on the shoulder, hovering above the asphalt. Micro reward. Each detail maintained curiosity. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The road ahead eventually showed signs of life. Faint town lights, the hint of familiar asphalt edges. But the sensation of being observed, of phantom vehicles pressing just out of reach, lingered. Open loop. Had the road itself been alive, or had we simply been caught in something else entirely? Even as civilization returned, the cruiser hummed, tires on solid asphalt again. I could feel the memory of lights, of shapes just out of reach, following me. The highway wasn't empty, and whatever had been there, blinking, impossible, was still out there somewhere, waiting for another set of headlights to wander too close. The headlights cut through the mist, but the road behind us didn't feel like it had an end. Every mile marker we passed seemed older than the one before, worn down by some unseen hand, or maybe by time itself stretching strangely here. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the leather of the cruiser's rim dig into my palms. Open loop. How could a road we had just driven feel unfamiliar? Like a dream we barely remembered? Johnson's voice was low, strained. Feels wrong, doesn't it? I nodded without looking at him, eyes fixed on the ribbon of asphalt ahead. The fog was thinning, but the shapes that had haunted us, the phantom lights, the impossible reflections, lingered in the corners of my vision. Pattern interrupt. Subtle echo of past events keeps tension alive. The county line sign appeared, dull and weathered, swinging slightly in a wind we couldn't feel. Relief threatened to settle, brief and shallow, but I couldn't let myself relax. Something about that sign felt off, like a bookmark in a story that wasn't ours. Micro reward. Detail ground the surreal in reality. We drove on. The road behind us stretched impossibly long. Shadows lingering where there shouldn't have been any. Open loop. Was the road bending time? Or had we entered some other layer of the world? Every tree line, every cracked pavement, seemed familiar yet subtly wrong. My pulse picked up, each beat loud in the quiet cruiser. A flicker in the rear view caught my eye. Just for a second, a reflection of the fog shifting, but not following the rules of physics. I blinked, and it was gone. Perspective shift. Something is being seen only from a single viewpoint. The silence between us thickened, heavy with unspoken questions. Johnson cleared his throat, shaking slightly. Do you think it's over? I wanted to say yes, but the lingering unease coiled in my chest. Pattern interrupt. Emotional shift heightened psychological tension. We passed a curve that shouldn't exist, a hairpin in the middle of a straight stretch. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. The cruiser's tires whispered against wet asphalt, a faint echo of phantom vehicles that had once shadowed us. Micro reward. Auditory detail reminds of prior peril. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure at the roadside, thin, unblinking, fading into fog. My heart skipped, but when I blinked, the shoulder was empty. Open loop. Who or what was that? Had it followed us all this way? The mist began to thin more, revealing the faint glow of distant lights, town lights, or maybe headlights far ahead. Relief teased the edges of my mind. Johnson let out a shaky laugh. We're gonna make it. But I didn't respond. My eyes stayed glued to the rear view. That road, stretching endlessly behind us, refused to feel finished. Pattern interrupt. Slight relief met with renewed tension. I noticed the horizon ahead had changed. Shapes of buildings appeared, familiar but distorted, angles just off, windows that didn't match frames. Micro reward. Visual twist keeps curiosity active. The county line had been crossed, but the world hadn't returned to normal. A faint hum resonated through the cruiser, low, vibrating along the frame. My reflection in the rear view flickered oddly, stretching for a fraction longer than it should have. Open loop. Was the hum mechanical, or something else still following? We passed a small creek, water glinting faintly under the cruiser's lights. Nothing moved, but the reflection seemed to shift independently, like another world layered on top of this one. Perspective shift. Reality bending subtly around us. I tried radio again. Static, not the harsh, broken static from before. This was smooth, low, humming underneath. Johnson's fingers drummed nervously on the dash. Pattern interrupt. Auditory shift escalates unease. The trees along the roadside grew taller, denser. Shadows stretched impossibly long, reaching toward us but dissolving in the fog before they could touch the cruiser. Micro reward. Tension through visual exaggeration without explanation. I glanced at Johnson. Sweat gleamed on his brow, eyes wide. It's like the highway doesn't end, he whispered. I couldn't argue. Every mile we covered, every marker we passed, the road felt the same. Unyielding, infinite. Open loop. Had the county line even changed anything? Ahead, the faint glow of streetlights appeared, uneven, flickering. Relief rose, tentative. But I caught movement in the corner of my eye, something following, slipping through fog between the trees. Micro reward, brief visual payoff. The cruiser's headlights washed over the horizon. Familiar shapes, gas stations, small buildings, finally started to anchor reality. But the feeling of being watched, of the road lingering behind, refused to leave. Pattern interrupt. Lingering dread ensures engagement. We slowed, cautiously approaching the edge of the county, past the last warned sign. Johnson exhaled shakily. We're out, right? I swallowed, nodding, but my stomach didn't agree. Something had followed us, or maybe it had never left. The highway behind us stretched like an echo, infinite, unresolved. Open loop. Lingering question sets up next chapter. Even as normal pavement and street lights replaced mist and shadows, the feeling of endless pursuit persisted. My hands relaxed slightly, but the memory of what we had seen clung to every reflection, every corner. Micro reward. Emotional closure paired with subtle unease. The county line was behind us, but the road's echo had not left. Somewhere out there, it waited patient, bending the rules we thought we understood. And I knew, somewhere down the line, we would see it again. Partial closure. Chapter ends with resolution of escape, but one unanswered curiosity remains.